I remember as a kid reading about like the 1920s in like your history class, and like the narrative that you were told in a very simple kind of way was they just kept borrowing more money and they just kept buying more stocks, and then it just all fell apart. And I remember as a kid just thinking, why were they so dumb? Like why were these people so dumb? I think that's how, in the future they're going to look back at this time, and there's going to be narratives of like, yeah, there was people that were buying bonds that were negative, meaning they were guaranteed to lose money, and there were human beings.
Why would you do
I think
that?
I think they were apes at the time.
Exactly.
They were they were
Neanderthals.
Neanderthals 50 years ago.
Today, I'm sitting with Preston Pysh, aerospace engineer, investor, and the host of the popular show, The Investors Podcast, which gets 2.5 million downloads a month. Preston, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here, Jay. Excited to do
Me
this.
too, man. As you know, I bring docents on the show to talk about their docents. So let's dive in. Let's talk about your docents. I ask everybody on the show before we get going, who are your top 3 rappers of all time?
Dude, that's such an embarrassing answer for me because like it's hilarious because Jason Williams even gave me a heads up that this
I
was a
knew.
question I was
I
going to be
knew it.
asked, and I'm still a disaster. I really don't listen to music, like
Sure.
period. And I know that sounds like an ultra nerd thing to say. I really, since I graduated from college, just don't listen to music. I listen to audiobooks. Like anytime I have an opportunity, I'm listening to an audiobook. But I will say this, in high school, I did listen to rap music, and it was pretty much Snoop Dogg was the only
Nice.
one I really listened to.
What's your genre of choice?
Honest, I swear to God, Jay, I don't listen. So like you could tell me a song that's been on the radio in the last 20 years, and I wouldn't be able to tell you whether that's a true or false statement.
I'm very similar with current music. I think from like 2005 on, I don't know anything. Like I'm just too busy working and stuff. I
Yeah.
just didn't really listen to current
Yeah.
music. But in high school, we're about the same age, right? Like, so I think back in high school, I used to listen to rap. So you just weren't really into it back then?
In college, I just didn't really listen to music, and then, once I got into the Army and I started flying, I was always studying for all my flight exams and that kinda stuff, and there's so much stuff you gotta memorize. And then when I got into Korea, I read this one book that really influenced me by, Tracy, what's his name? He's like a self-help guy. In the book, he talks about turning your car into a learning laboratory, and how it drastically shaped his life by listening to audiobooks in the car. And so I just kind of adopted that as like, all right, I like that idea. Let me just kind of like make this like a protocol for myself that anytime I get in a car, I'm not listening to music, I'm listening to some type of book, or I'm trying to educate myself. And I've had that habit for 2 decades now.
Okay, so you're giving me one rapper, Snoop Dogg. That's it?
I mean,
Lamar's gonna be pretty disappointed, man.
dude, I just don't
I respect
have.
that.
If you ask me an 80s song, I can't even tell you, like, I kinda hear it in the background, like, I'll say, "Yeah, I recognize that
That's
song." All these
awesome.
things, I don't know. What's the name of the song? I have no idea. Yeah, so, yeah, I just totally turned the rapper question into I listen to audiobooks.
The worst part of this answer is that Jason told you. You should have had an answer.
Yeah,
Let me just do a
and
Google search, top 3 rappers. Love that you didn't even look it up.
yeah, how I answer this, and I'm like, anything that you say is probably gonna be, people are gonna tell that you're not being
Yeah,
honest, and then they're just gonna make fun of you anyway, so what's the point?
that's all good. Let's dive into your background. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a little bit north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in this really small farm town called Saxonburg, and, yeah, lived there my whole life. When I was 18, I, went into the military, went into a military academy.
Tell us about your family, your parents. Like, because I'm gonna dive in. Like, who inspired you, motivated you? I'm sure they had a big impact, maybe. So let's dive in.
Both my parents influenced me in a huge way. My, grandparents on my mother's side also influenced me in a huge way. They lived less than a mile from our house, so I spent a lot of time with them and with, obviously, my parents. And then on my dad's side, both of his parents had passed, and I really never knew them. So that's why my mother's parents were a big influence and a huge part of our lives. The thing that my parents kind of instilled in us at a very young age is just you tell the truth. And my dad would always, it's kind of funny, he would always say, "You gotta read." And to the point where it was just like a total eye roll, right? I really did not enjoy reading or books or anything growing up, which is kind of funny because after college, I just took on like this hardcore like love for it. And I really kind of attribute a lot of that to the fact that I never had any teachers that inspired me or just I hated English class. I hated writing. I really liked math a lot. Like that was just a fit. When I went into the class, I was like, "Oh, well, this all makes sense." Like just completely makes sense to me. When I go to the English class, it's like, "Well, this is a pronoun sometimes, and sometimes it's like all these rules are bendable, and
Yeah,
sometimes
the English
they're
language
valid, and
is
sometimes they're
ridiculous,
not."
right?
Yeah, and so immediately I was like, "Okay, well, if you can't tell me something that makes sense all the time, I don't even wanna learn it." Was kinda
Yeah. I gotta learn all
was
these rules of well, it's always this case, except for these 2 times, you know? It's like, what?
and, it's interesting. It's carried with me for a very long time. I get highly annoyed of memorization of anything, and even when I got into flight school, it annoyed the living hell out of me because a lot of the times in the aviation community, especially military aviation, the person who is quote unquote the smart guy is the guy who just memorized the most.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like he's like, "Well, tell me what this tail wheel is rated for as far as like how many PSI you can put on it." And I'm just like, "All right, is there an issue with with the tire? Like why is this even a question right now?" He's like, "Oh, so you didn't read page
Oh
whatever
my
of the
god.
manual of the operator's manual that says this." That was a very difficult thing for me within the culture was just this idea that intelligence is based on memorization versus being able to intuitively understand how something works because now you can kind of dynamically understand how to react in an aircraft because you understand the fundamentals of like your lift equation and all that kind of stuff. So back to where we were really at, which was the where did you grow up and how are you influenced? So my
Sure.
parents were influential. Both of them were entrepreneurs. My dad, from the ground up, started just kind of rental properties and had real estate kind of thing that he was doing. And my mother had a dance studio, and my mom taught and had students that have won at national levels for baton twirling, and she had a lot of other things that she taught, but that was her forte was baton twirling. Yeah, she had multiple teams that she's taken to a national
Wow.
level and won with. So yeah, uh, she's an expert at that stuff.
That's great. So, you got a little bit of an entrepreneurial kinda spirit from that, I guess, by growing up around that?
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah, and they were really hard workers. So neither one of them went to college.
Did your dad have a job and he invested and then eventually just went full-time into real estate or
Yeah, so he was working in sales and for air conditioning, like an air conditioning type company, and then was just continually investing and kept growing his property, portfolio, and just kind of became an expert in that. And then at a certain point, he just did that full time. As a young kid, and you're seeing how hard your parents are working and trying to make the right decisions and grow their business. And how do you treat customers when you own the equity, which you is kind of a lost art these days because it seems like everything's owned by some larger corporation, and you don't ever see this people approaching a business as an equity holder. They approach it as an employee. I learned a lot of those lessons from them, and I feel very privileged to be able to say this is just they never let me down as a kid. Like, they always were the example of what right looked like. They would make hard decisions. They were always making decisions that weren't in their own short-term interest over the long-term expense. They were never doing that. I read a lot of books on the brain, and I enjoy studying about how cognitively we get programmed. A lot of the books will tell you that what you see in the first 5 years of your life shape you tremendously from an ethical standpoint. And so I think that that's probably one of the reasons I put such a strong emphasis on just trying to do what's right for other people, and sometimes even doing it ahead of how you or maybe want to do for yourself. I would tell you that those lessons were taught to me in the first 5 years of my life just by kind of watching my parents and my grandparents.
Did your parents, your father, your mother, did they talk about money in the house? Did you learn about money from your parents when you were younger?
They would probably tell you yes. But, this is what they taught me was implicit, and what they taught me was that you save for what it is you want before you just go out and buy
Right.
it. You don't buy it with credit. That was implicitly taught to me. Yeah, you gotta do the work before you can enjoy the fruits of the labor, and it seems nowadays that that's
Credit cards, loans, yeah. Home equity lines, right?
it's like, "Hey, let me enjoy the pleasures, and then I'll do the work." That was not how they operated at all. So that was something that was taught to me, but maybe not in a way where they sat me down and said, "Now this is how you."
It's just through how they carried out parenting, and you just saw it.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important point, especially for people that are maybe raising kids right now. It has a whole lot less to do with what you tell your kids. It's more of the example that you set for them that they're gonna just naturally see,
Mhm.
and if they don't pick up on it, they don't pick up on it. Like, you telling them
Then
something
they
is
definitely
probably
won't
not
listen.
gonna. In fact, yeah, you might actually create the polar opposite outcome. That's something that when I went off into the military that was taught to me was you lead by example, period.
Mhm.
Like, if you're gonna ask somebody to do something, you better darn well be the first person doing it. I mean, just the first principle of leadership is that you lead by example. So they were doing all of those things. I don't think they had a lot of leadership experience, but in a weird way, they kind of, I think, because they were equity owners of their business, anybody who's an equity owner almost always tries to lead by example and is trying to do things in the best interest of their customers before themselves, because they know that if they don't, there's going to be implications of not having future business if they act differently.
Did you go to private school or public school as a kid?
I went to public school.
You did? Okay. And then what made you choose West Point? Like, how do you make that decision? I had a fr I think I told you, I had a friend that went to West Point, and, he went to wrestling, camp every summer. So he decided to go because he went to the camp and got to know the coach over many years. How did you make that decision?
I think the answer a lot of people will tell themselves is that they did it because they wanted to serve their country and they wanted to do the right thing. And I think that that briefs really well. But I think if I had to be fair with myself and I wanted to really try to be like just forthright with myself and why I went, I think some of it just had to do with me trying to impress other people that I could do it. Obviously, that was not my main reason for going, because you'd never make it if that was your main reason for going. But I would say that that was a small factor of it, was just like I really wanted to do something that was hard and prove that I could do it.
And by the way, most people don't know this. If you go to West Point, you can quit after your sophomore year and not pay the tuition and leave, and it was like 2 years of college,
Yeah.
basically. And, like, nobody really does that, right? It's like everybody wants to, but nobody will quit.
Some do, but it's a very small number. Yeah, it's a very small number. Now, if I was going to say the bigger reason why I went, because the reason that I just explained, I think, is a very small sliver of, I look at things in a probabilistic way. Like, it's not one thing that drove me. It's probably 10 things.
Mhm.
And what the one I just described was whatever percent of the overall decision. The bigger decision was I had a cousin who was a head of the Dentac up there. He was a surgeon and a dentist up at West Point. And so we were visiting the family when I was a sophomore, and when I saw the school and I saw how everyone was there marching around, I saw the classes, I learned about the aptitude of the academics that were there. I learned that I could maybe fly helicopters after I would graduate. There was just this really neat vibe when I visited the school, and it just looked extremely challenging, and I really liked that. And so when I was there, I was like, "This looks, like, really hard. This looks like this is gonna suck." But at the same time, I really like the camaraderie. I love the idea of potentially becoming a pilot after I would graduate.
Were you an athlete when you were in high school?
I was, I played baseball. I did some track, but that was not the thing that got me in there by any shape of the imagination.
The camaraderie kind of thing, right? The teamwork, like that's probably
Yeah,
a
yeah.
part of that probably resonates, right?
I like that. I like the team part of it. I really in serving my country was obviously something that was very important to me. My grandfather, he had served in the Navy, and it was funny at a young age, he was really like, this is what real men do, Preston. Kind of like the pep talk, like, if you went here, I would be really proud of you.
And again, so you wanted to make him proud, I guess. There's a part of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just loved my grandfather, and he's still alive, and I love my grandfather. And so, the family was very supportive if I wanted to do it. When we were up there visiting, like, "So, Preston, do you think you could do this?" And I look back
That's a
and,
challenge.
yeah, I do think I could do this. And I think that trip was really kind of the thing that was probably the biggest driving factor of me seeing something that looked like a real challenge. It looked like something that my family would be really proud of me for doing, and I wanted to make them
Yeah.
proud. It was just kind of this thing that I was like, I want to do this. I think this would be a really fun challenge. And like the whole first year thing before going there to me was a little humorous. Like I was like, you know what? This looks like this would totally suck. And I think I could suck it up. And I think I could do this. And I think it would be some cool bragging rights. And it would be this and it'd be that.
But it's not easy, right? Like Maurice told me, it's a difficult. It's not like
Oh
college.
my
I mean,
God.
it's going in the military. I mean, it's
So
legit, man. It's pretty strict there.
that's a great point. So I'm describing my emotions and like how I was thinking about this going into it. And then you get there. And then you're going through it and you're saying, and it was so funny because I remember how I looked at the school prior to going
That's
there.
interesting. Yeah.
And then I remembered how I viewed the school after having been there for even 4 weeks. And let me tell you, it was the polar opposite of what I had remembered, like the lens. Like it was mortifying.
Well, Mo told me that like they did some things like I don't know if you had to do this, but like you had to memorize the cover of the USA Today because the upperclassmen that are senior to you,
Yeah.
right? Like
Every
yeah,
morning.
it's crazy stuff, man.
Yeah.
Your bed had to be made perfectly neat. You can't lay on it during the day. And I'm like laying on my bed on my laptop typing away to him, and he's like, "Dude, I can't do that. You don't know how good you got it."
Yeah. I'd say every morning we got up at probably 5 o'clock. And yeah, it was just immediately start memorizing. So you had to, this is probably where my hatred for
Yeah,
memorization really comes
exactly.
from. We had to memorize the front page of the New York Times, which we also had to deliver each morning. The New York Times would arrive in this Sally port that like in the middle of the school. And whoever was on delivering newspaper duties, I think the newspapers would start showing up around 4 a.m. And so you'd go down there, if you were on that duty for the day as a freshman, you have all these different duties that you have to do. So you'd go down there, then you'd start delivering all those newspapers to all the upperclassmen. They break you into companies, which are like frats. And so each one of these frats were about 120 people, I would say, I think something like that. And three-fourths of that 120 people are upperclassmen, and one-fourth is all the plebes or freshmen. And like you had to figure it out. So like the plebes, the freshmen would have somebody who's in charge of the newspapers for the week. And so that person would then get a team of 5 people to help them out for the week or whatever it is. And so what's interesting is you figure out really fast that if you are not a team player, you will be ostracized and basically slaughtered socially amongst your peers. If you're laying there at 8 o'clock and you're going through your classwork or whatever, and you're busy, and your buddy shows up and he's like, "Hey, dude, I need another person to help me out with delivering newspapers this week. Can I put your name down?" And your answer is always yes. Because if it's not, you're going to start getting a reputation for yourself. And then once you get a reputation for yourself amongst your peers, they're going to eat you
You're done.
alive.
Yeah.
You're done. You will not make
It's like
it.
you're like in prison now. You're not in college. You're not in a military academy. You're now in prison.
There's a little bit of an aspect of what you're describing to that, where you figure out very fast that if you are not one of the cells in the body that are sharing and participating with the other cells, you will be a cancer and you will be removed. Yes. And so socially, I would tell you, if you really want to learn how to become a social master, I think you show up to a school like that, and and you'll figure out real fast how good you are socially.
That makes a lot more sense. I thought it was just hazing, but there's team building and there's camaraderie and there's leaning on each other. So I understand why they do it now. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And I'm not even describing the interactions with the upperclassmen. I'm just
Yep.
describing the interactions with your
Exactly. Yeah.
peers, like your
Yeah.
classmates.
We're in this together, bro. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what you find out really fast is that you do start to build this kinship with each
Yeah.
other.
You wrap up, you go to West Point, you do your 4 years, and then you do, I think we talked about this. You did more than five. Most people do 5 years, right? But you wanted to be, you wanted to
Yeah.
fly helicopters. So you had to do a little bit more.
Yeah, you have to do an additional, well, I don't know what it is now, but you had to do an additional 2 years if you wanted to go to flight school. But yeah, so I graduated. I got sent to Fort Rucker, Alabama, which was your flight school, and which was just awesome because we went from this like really regimented environment where there's really, you're so busy with your academics and everything, all the additional stuff they make you do, like they make you do sports, and like I had to play rugby, and I think I was like 140 pounds soaking wet when I was there. Like you're doing all these things that are very busy. So we graduate and we get down to flight school, and it's like, hey, your job is to learn how to fly, and we're going to pay you like a salary. And you're with all your old classmates that also branched aviation out of West Point that are all showing up at flight school all at the same time. And they're all single and like ready to like catch up on all the lost time that they had from not going to
That was
college.
definitely my buddy. Yeah.
You're 22 years old and you're like, not only is this like
Freedom.
college,
Weekends.
but I have money
Yeah.
and I'm getting a salary. That was really a lot of fun to go down to
That's
Fort
cool.
Rucker.
You went overseas, right? You were deployed. Did you go to Iraq?
My first deployment was to Korea. And then when I came back, I went to the 101st Airborne Division, and then I did 2 rotations to Afghanistan with the 101st
Afghanistan.
Airborne
Okay.
Division.
And you were flying
Yeah,
Apache helicopter?
Apaches. Yeah,
Wow. That's pretty intense, man. Like into combat zone or like what were you doing?
yeah. So the first rotation, I didn't have a lot of flying. I was on a staff, and so my flight time was very minimal, but I did fly a little bit. And then on the second rotation, I was a company commander, and I was in charge of the whole RC South region for attack helicopters. For any type of a attack helicopter that was flying in the Kandahar region, I was the company commander for. So it was very busy and involved a lot of stuff that I think a lot of people probably wouldn't want to hear about. It was a situation that I would say drastically reinforced the importance of all the lessons I had learned to date, but in a way that you'll always remember for the rest of your life. And it's things, like your ethics you'd never compromise ever after living and seeing some of those things. It's just like you know what? Nothing is more important than my integrity and telling the truth with somebody. I don't care if it costs me whatever. Just doesn't matter anymore because you just kind of look at the world through a different lens after things like that.
Preston, how does one go from a veteran, a West Point grad, to running one of the most popular finance blogs on the internet? You got to give me this transition.
Because there was never a plan, I think. Honestly, I think because I was doing it just because I just really enjoyed talking about those things. Like I stood up the Buffett's Books website. There was no subscription, there was no cost. If you wanted to buy a book that I wrote that kind of went with the site, you'd buy that, but the site was 100% free. And I was doing it because I was trying to figure it out myself. I was trying to figure out, how does Warren Buffett
Yeah, you told me you
invest?
wrote the books. You were learning as you wrote the books, right?
I was learning as I was
That's
writing the book,
amazing,
the
dude. I
first
love it.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, so I was, like, making notes for myself, and I was like, "You know what? Like, I'm doing these really detailed notes for myself." Like, I just couldn't find, like, perfect example. So, like, I'm listening to Warren Buffett, and I was like, "Okay, he keeps bringing up The Intelligent Investor." So I go and I read The
Oh my
Intelligent
god,
Investor, and
that
I'm like,
book.
"This is so dry, and this is so boring, and I still don't understand how he's doing the calculation based on reading this book." So, like, how do you do the calculation? And so then I just kept reading and finding more material. And so I started like piecing it together because it didn't seem like there was any like really good resource for somebody that was like me, who wasn't formally trained in school. My undergrad was in engineering. It
Aerospace
wasn't
engineer.
in anything. It wasn't in any, yeah, it was very math intensive, but it wasn't in anything that was finance. I didn't know what an income statement was, a balance sheet. I didn't know how they worked. It was like, well, how do these things fit together? Like, well, why are they important? Why does Warren Buffett say that accounting's the language of
Mhm.
business? Like, long story short, like I was collecting like all these resources and I was trying to piece the puzzle together without any formal instructor other than these books that I just kept seeking out that Buffett had recommended and other influential investors had recommended. So I was frustrated that there wasn't something out there that made it simple. Like, why does this have to be so hard to figure
Yeah,
out?
you're right. I've read the Intelligent Investor, and like those books back then were not easy to comprehend as you're reading through it. You're like, it's
It's
like you needed to have
ridiculous.
a prior knowledge to read that book and understand, right?
It's ridiculous. And so I was looking at it. And then so when I started to figure out the math for like a discount cash
Mhm.
flow, I'm thinking, this is like baby math. This is like math for like eighth graders. And I don't I don't say that to sound like an egotist or anything like that, but like compared to like the engineering math that I'm used to, I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is a flipping joke. So like, why are all these books making this so hard? Like, this is really simple stuff. Now the art to it is really kind of the qualitative features of kind of understanding the competitive moat that the companies have, which the books do a great job kind of explaining. But I just kind of felt like there wasn't a guidebook that just kind of laid it out in a really simple way. And there definitely wasn't a book that married up this idea that interest rates in this bond market have kind of a symbiotic relationship with equities, right? There was no books that were
Yeah,
like
why is that?
saying
Because
that.
that was like,
Why
that's the
is it?
aha moment. The rates drive everything. And I found that out many years later. Yeah.
For me, I was like, this is absurd that there's no source that makes this accessible and makes this simple for somebody who doesn't want to go spend $100,000
Business
go
school.
getting an MBA. What is this insanity? And why is there not a resource for this? That's what drove me to build this website. And this website is still active. This website is 100% free. I don't charge anything for any of the 10 hours of content that's on this website. It's called Buffett's Books, and it was me coming up with an outline of trying to explain everything that I had learned and studied so that it would be accessible and simple to understand and explained not for one's ego, but for the actual audience and the people that were trying to learn it. Anyway, so I built this website. Well, I didn't have a clue how to do a website at all. And this is like before WordPress was kind of a thing. And so it's like, oh, God, no, well, I guess I got to teach myself HTML and teach myself CSS and how these
Oh
sheets
my
kind of work
god. You
together.
coulda
And
just went to,
it
like,
was a
Upwork.
disaster. Well, I figured that out along the way. I figured that out too
Yeah,
late,
yeah.
but
Spend many hours figuring out how to do the stuff first.
yeah, I eventually got to the point where I discovered that the freelance market for especially for soft skills and services is crazy. But anyway, so I built that website out, and I guess the whole point was I was doing this because I wanted to teach myself, but I also wanted to share what I was learning with other people to help other people because I just kind of felt like Wall Street. I'm a Wall Street basher, dude. I'm just gonna say it for what it is. I don't feel like anybody on Wall Street really truly gives a damn about anybody but themselves.
100%.
And I know that's not true. I know it's not true for everybody. I'm saying this in a
Broadly.
very macro kind of broad stroke. There's great people out there. I saw the 2008 crisis. In fact, I was in Afghanistan when it happened. And in the evening, when I was going back after my day and I was just sitting down, this was kind of my outlet was writing and trying to crack the code on like how Warren Buffett invests, how this macro picture kind of fits together and how you do valuations and all that kind of stuff, right? When I got back from Afghanistan, I built the website. I recorded all these videos just trying to make it simple, take all the fancy talk and terminology out of it so that it's just like, hey, instead of saying the word net income, that's the same thing as the profit. Like the money that you stick in your pocket is the net income. So now that you know that terminology, that's what it is. Revenue, that's your top line. So
Sales.
if you sell, yeah, the sales of the company, it's like, but you don't know that if you haven't been most likely haven't been formally trained or have some type of experience. So I was trying to build that resource, and then it just kept blossoming into other things, and then it just grew, and here we are.
So you told me that the first book you wrote actually was the West Point book, right? You
Yes,
figured out how to,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
become, like, the number 1 bestseller and all this stuff, which is cool. I mean, then you got into the next book, and then you went to the Buffett books, but, like, you wanna tell that story? Because I think that was a just amazing transition on how you did that. Like, because 'cause they're 3 different
This is
topics.
crazy.
It's cool, yeah. It's like a hack.
This is interesting. So I wanted to capture some short stories of like some really of the most memorable and funny things that happened to me when I was at West Point. So I wrote down like the first story, and it was like, I don't know, 7 pages long, this story. And I tried to frame it so that like you really kind of were like expecting something. And then at the end, like you get the punchline. But these are like real stories that happen. I wrote the first one and I gave it to a friend. I said, hey, read this and let me know what you think. And he came back to me and like threw the papers at me, says, that was absolutely hilarious. And I said, really? I was like, you're not just telling me that to like appease me. Like, did you actually enjoy this? Like, if I wrote another one, would you read? And he's like, yes. I was like, all right. So the reason I did that is because I figured if I can do it with one of the stories, maybe if I did it with 10 or 12 of the stories, that I could actually piece it together and turn it into a book and create a passive income by selling a book. And it would be a fun way for me to kind of document some of my stories from when I was there. It to me, it was just going to be kind of a win-win to just do it, right? So anyway, I did this and I just kept writing the next one and then I wrote the next one and I was getting positive feedback from people. And so then it came to the point where it was like, all right, time to publish this thing, which I didn't know the first thing about publishing a book, not the first thing. And that if you're a real author, what you do is you float titles and ideas to book companies and they say, Roger, go ahead, do it, thumbs up. But here I was, I had the whole manuscript, like any amateur that tries to publish a book. I had the manuscript. And so I went, I floated it out to a couple publishing houses, never heard anything back. I went to a literary agent. They floated the book to a couple different publishing houses. He comes back to me and he's like, hey, I'm just going to I'm just going to push this back to you and good luck.
You're done. You're fired as a client.
And I was like, and I just kind of put it on the shelf and was like, oh, well, that was a real waste of my time to try to publish it. The stories were still there and I could still pass them down to my kids and whatnot, but I was just like, oh, that was pretty frustrating. I was just doing some research on Amazon on self-publishing, and there was this book that came up on, and this was just like a brand new thing that was out called print on demand. And I was like, huh, what's this? And so I'm reading the Amazon reviews on this print on demand book and self-publishing print on demand. And so I was reading some reviews on this. The reviews are just like, this book is incredible. You can get your book published and it's not hard at all. And so I buy this book, I read it, and it was just a total like step-by-step guide on not only just how to like self-publish the book, but also how to leverage search engine optimization in order to sell it once you do self-publish it and all this kind of stuff. So I go and I do all of these things. I end up self-publishing the book. I read some other books on search engine optimization to kind of add to what this other book was telling me about how that's important and kind of how to leverage it. And I published the book and it turns up as like the number one selling book on West Point on Amazon. And it stayed in that position. I don't even know what it is now, but it stayed in that position for quite a while. And I was just like,
Now, when you say SEO, did you have a direct website that was promoting the book for the SEO, or were you just like SEO
no,
within the algorithm of the search results on
no.
Amazon?
So I can say this now, but if you would have asked me years ago, I would have never told you this. Just so people know, if you're trying to do this now, this is insanely competitive to publish books on Amazon these days. So I wish you luck.
Good luck, guys.
um, yeah, this whole self-publishing thing, like I hit this at a time that it just was just. And so what this really
What
means
year? What
before I
year is that?
describe
What
this,
year is that when you did that?
this is like 2008,
Okay.
maybe I want to
Okay.
say. So this was like 12 years ago.
Yeah. That's like
And
light
so,
years away in the internet, right? So they've
oh my
closed all the
God,
loopholes
yeah,
on this, I'm sure.
this was over a decade ago. What was so crazy to me was here I can publish a book. I can take the digital files. I can set those digital files up with a printing house that when they receive an order from Amazon will immediately accept the order. They'll print the book on the spot. They'll bind it, print it, put it in the Amazon packaging and have it mailed out that
That's
day
amazing.
that the order was made. What this means is there's zero
Yeah.
inventory.
No
Like
upfront cost. Yeah,
typically there's no cost. There
absolutely.
was no cost to me. All it was, hey, pay this annual fee to have your book listed, which was, oh my Lord, Jay, I want to say $20 a year or something insane, right? It was like $20 to have the book listed on their, like, to set it up as a print on demand book. And then all they did was just send me royalty checks.
But you told me that the publishers were gonna pay you 20%, if I'm not mistaken, and you got like what, 2/3 with on demand? You made more money doing it this way.
So that's the best part. Is so on the print on demand, I could list it for whatever because I owned 100% of the
Yeah.
copyrights. I did it all myself. And so I was like, well, what do I price this book at? Well, the other ones are $20. So I guess I'll just charge. I think I charged, I don't even remember. I think it was around $20. And so then it's like, all right. In the end, my margin was something like on the order of 60%, I want to say.
And the publishers don't pay nearly that, right? If they take you on.
Oh my, yeah,
Because they gotta
no. I
print
mean,
them, they gotta
if you
ship them, distribution, bookstores, right? Yeah.
marketing, the whole bit, like I think if you're doing in traditional publishing, I used to know these numbers. If you're doing over I want to say the numbers are between like 5% and 10% for probably people
That's
who
your cut as
are,
the author.
yeah,
Oh
as the
my
author. Yeah.
god, yeah.
It's definitely not more than 15%.
That's terrible. It's terrible.
So here I am banging out these 60%. I think it was maybe even as high as
And you're number 1 for the
65%.
category, so that's just amazing.
And I was number one in that category. So anyway, yeah, I mean, the margins were crazy. And what was great is I had no inventory. I had nothing to manage.
Yeah,
I had nothing to manage at
that's
all.
awesome.
Not even shipping, nothing.
Yeah,
It was just crazy. So I started just getting these checks every month. And it was like, holy crap, this
I'm
is
on to something.
great to just I'm on to something for sure about the SEO piece. So what I think intuitively to me without reading that book was you would think that they would take all the text inside of the actual book because you're uploading a Kindle version of the book. And that's another thing, like the Kindle versions, like there's no printing costs for Kindles, but yet a lot of the Kindles are almost nearly the same price.
Do you get a higher cut from the self-publishing on that because they're not publishing anything, or is that just like directly uploaded to Amazon and they take a cut? How does that work?
So Amazon works, they have different pricing categories, but the margins I think for like a Kindle is about 50% if you own the copyrights on the book.
Obviously, Amazon takes the other half of that. 100% profit to them.
Just because they have a monopoly on the
Yeah,
platform, they can do it.
distribution. Yeah,
The Barnes and Noble Nook gave them a little competition in the start, but in the end, it
it's
was
wherever the people
devastated
are that
by
are buying, then it's
yeah,
Amazon.
totally,
Yeah, they
totally.
have leverage.
But, yeah, so back to the SEO. So you would think it would be just like how many words in the book, say West Point or whatever, right? Well, what it was that was driving a lot of Amazon's search results. This is back whenever I was doing this, and I imagine they're using AI these days. It was based on the titling, and it's the metadata of the titling. I just titled the book "The Diary of a West Point Cadet." So West Point was in there and Cadet was in there. I tried to just keep it really simple and just leverage the living heck out of the metadata that I suspect somebody was going on and searching for. And what a lot of people who write fiction books don't realize is that when you go to Amazon and you search for a book and you're searching for, like, if you wanted to go get a book for West Point, what would you type for your search? You would type in West Point book or just West Point, right? Well, I've got like two of the four words in the title. I have no idea what the percent is that was driving their algorithm at the time, but I would imagine it was 70% of the search result was just based on the titling of the metadata.
Wow. You hit lightning in a bottle with the West Point book because you had no idea how many people were searching for this on the platform. You just didn't know.
No. So I did.
How did you figure that
And
out?
well, and it didn't really much matter for this particular book because I had already written it and I didn't know anything about the marketing and the numbers and anything like that. I just in my mind is like, yeah, I think there's a lot of people that probably read a book about West Point in a year, but
Total
not really
intuition.
understanding like compared to other categories and other topics, I was very ignorant. But there was a guy, I believe he still has his site up. It was called Phoner Books, like Foner maybe. And what this guy did is he went to the Amazon book ranking. So Amazon doesn't say how many books they sell. But if you
Yeah.
scroll down on the book, it'll say this book ranks as 50,000 on our site, or this book ranks at 1 million on our site. And what this guy did is he created a curve.
Interesting.
Somehow he got access to data. Yeah. And he created this curve that equated Amazon ranking to what that would equate to in book sales per month.
Okay.
I was looking at, okay, what's the number one book in the category? What's its Amazon rank? And then I knew, hey, this is going to produce this many sales. And if I'm charging this price and I have these margins, this is how much revenue or how much
Sure.
net income. I just said it. How much profit you're going to stuff into your
Yeah,
pocket.
now you're stuck. Now you're the Wall Street guy.
How much profit you're going to stick into your pocket on an annualized
Yeah,
basis.
because you know your
So
margins, you know what the costs are if you're going direct. But you decided to go direct because the publisher feedback, I think you told me was there's just not a market for this, right? Like we don't see a huge market. Like how many people have
yeah,
gone to West
yeah,
Point in
yeah,
the last
yeah.
20 years? Who's interested in buying this? Potential and former cadets, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And so I found out that the market was way smaller than what I just kind of thought. because I looked at it like this, like, hey, well, there's 1,000 people a year. There's like 10,000 that apply. If even, and this is why I always laugh when you hear these pitches like on Shark Tank or like the venture capital. Like, if I even get 10% of those numbers, when you hear that, you just laugh so hard. For anybody that's actually created something, they just laugh when they hear people say those things. I learned that and I was like, what if I did this for other categories? Now that I kind of know the equation and I know how to look at the Amazon rank, and I can look at a category that has an enormous appetite for reading a topic or a titling category. So I'll give you an example of something that I did later on. I obviously did this for myself when I wrote my books on Warren Buffett. I also did it with this is a really funny story. I think it's a cool business story. So I was doing research on this, and I did this for a few years, where I was just publishing books and I owned the copyrights, and I was hiring writers on the
Ghostwriters.
side, using not for anything that I've written, but for other books that I do own. There was a category about brewing beer, homebrew beer. And I'm telling you, the numbers on the Amazon ranks were off the charts. I was just like, holy, this is awesome. Like, if I could find somebody to write a book about homebrew, and based on my SEO and titling skills, I think I could sell the socks off this thing. I started to learn how to write solicitations for different categories, and then I would mitigate the risk, like, hey, write the first chapter, and if it sucks, then maybe or if it's good, I'll keep hiring you to write the rest of the book, and if not, then I'll move on to a different person, and just kind of learn contract strategies in order to mitigate risks. Anyway, so I find this guy, I put out this solicitation. All these people bid on writing this book about homebrew. And in the solicitation, I specifically say, I'm going to own 100% of the copyrights. You won't own any. You're going to love this story. I will let you keep your name on the book as the ghostwriter. Like, you can actually put
Which
your
is
bio
very
on there. You
rare
can
for a
put your
ghostwriter,
name.
you know?
That's right. Yeah, for surprisingly. And what I was leveraging was a book I had read. I think this is out of How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think it's from this book. All these books mixed together, so I apologize if I'm giving the wrong resource. But there's a story about Carnegie, and Carnegie, he wanted to have rabbits when he was a kid growing up, but he didn't want to have to take care of the rabbits. And what he thought was, maybe if I go to the two little neighbor girls and I let them name the rabbits after themselves, but it comes with a condition that they have to take care of the rabbits. And what he said is that he learned a lesson very early in his life that people are willing to pay an enormous price for their name and for their brand to be associated with something. And so I leveraged this when I was doing this particular book deal with this homebrew book that I ended up publishing, where I told the guy, like, hey, yeah, I think your name should be on the book, so bid accordingly, because I'm going to let your name be on it. And I guarantee it's going to get published. And so for a lot of people, they don't know how to publish the book, or even getting a publisher is not an easy task. And so the guy who bid on it, he had his undergrad in English from Penn,
Wow.
from an Ivy League
Yeah.
school. And he was currently working at like a winery, but loved doing homebrew himself. And so he wrote this banger of a book. I mean, this guy did just a fantastic job. And what was great is he had some ownership in it because he was putting his name on it. So he had some ownership
Sort of.
to the quality, right?
He gets all
And
the credit.
I don't
You
think
get all the money.
he gets all the credit. I didn't care about any of the credit. I could care less. I just wanted to make money on the book. It was a business deal for me. So I don't think I paid this guy more than like $3,000 or $4,000 to write this. And then I went into the publishing mode. I obviously got it all configured and in the proper formatting. And then I got it listed for $20. I titled it great. It got onto the first page to compete with all this. This is a very fiercely competitive space, but I got it in there, and the thing started ranking, I would say, in the top 5 for quite a while.
How did he feel about that? I mean, it's weird because it's like a double-edged sword. Like, he must have been happy that it was a top book, but he's probably wishing he had royalties.
Of course, but he had no clue how to do that.
It probably helped his ghostwriting book, because you say, "Look at this book over here. It's a top-selling book, and I wrote that book, so I could do your ghostwriting."
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's
So
great.
it's a super expensive business card for him.
That's so funny. But, I mean, it's gotta be tough to be a ghostwriter because you can't really say, "I wrote that book," right? That's under contract, NDA.
But, for me, writing is kinda like pulling teeth, and that's why I enjoy the podcast. So it's just so easy to kinda have a
Yeah.
conversation without having to really kinda do all the editing is what just is. To be a great writer, you gotta be a great editor, and you gotta really kinda hit it like 15 times at least to, like, just make a fantastic paper, you know? I think for him, being an English major, being somebody who loved to write, I think it was probably a pleasure for him to make an easy 4,000
Yeah, yeah.
bucks because he did it. He d Dude, he wrote like a 100,000 word book. Dude, he banged it out so fast, and, I mean, he had pictures. It was great. It was I was really proud of how it came out, at the end. I mean, his picture was on the back cover as the author and
Does
everything,
that
and
book still sell? Do you still get royalties on that?
yeah, I still
That's
get
awesome.
royalties
And it'll
on the
be like
book.
that forever, probably.
Now
That's crazy. Is it diminishing over time? It's dropping over time?
yeah. Well, the space even got more
Oh, man.
competitive, and as people learned that your barrier to entry now for publishing printable content is nearly nothing. I mean, the barrier to entry was all the gatekeepers in the publishing industry that were trying to, knock one out of the ballpark, and so that filtering was massive, and you don't have any of that anymore. There's no gatekeepers for publishing a book at all. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of
I think it's a
wild
cool
how that
story. You
whole
told me this the other
industry
day,
has
and I was
changed.
like, "This is so crazy that you did this homebrew book." It's like, "What?" I never knew that. I
Yeah,
think it just shows, like, it's your parents. It's the entrepreneurial spirit. Like, you just have that grit, you
yeah,
know? That's pretty cool.
I had fun doing it.
Let's go back to the investing, though, because you got into, writing the books on investing. You're learning about investing, and then you started to apply those methodologies and invest. Did you invest while you were in the military? Did you start
Yeah,
value investing? I guess you
yeah,
started off
and
in value investing,
yeah,
right? Which is
yeah,
crazy. We're gonna talk about
yeah.
Bitcoin. I don't know how you go from that to that, so we gotta get there. But, like, so when you started to invest, I guess you were just taking some of the earnings that you had and put it into the
I
markets and
I'm still a value investor to this day. It's hard for me to implement any of it because I think that you're dealing with a ruler that's like Alice in Wonderland. So, my challenge to value investors is like, hey, if this Bitcoin thing is right and this is actually going to play out, like, how in the world do you think these market caps are going to continue to be what they are in the
Mm.
future? So that's dangerous grounds for anybody
Do you still have
who's
equities, or you're out of equities, right? And at this point?
no, I
Yeah,
don't.
you're done.
I
Yeah,
don't.
yeah. You're
I find
value
the
investing in
whole
Bitcoin now.
entire I'm value investing in Bitcoin. Assuming my opinion on Bitcoin is correct, you're going to have a whole new fixed income market that's going to be stood up around this. You're going to have completely different interest rates that are then going to evolve out of that. And then you're going to have the equity market that's going to be completely repriced based on those risk-free rates that are going to naturally occur. The only thing that I can really equate this to that would allow a person to visualize what I'm describing is, imagine all the matter is getting sucked into a black hole, and then it's getting blown out into another universe on the other side. All of that matter is getting stripped down into its most fundamental energy strings as it's passing through that event horizon and through the black hole, and then as it comes back out the other side, it's then reassembling itself into atoms, and then the atoms are turning into molecules, and the molecules are in
Something new is
reassembling
reemerging
themselves.
on
And
the other
so
side, yeah.
that's right. So, like, when I'm looking at what's happening in the economy right now, I kind of see that we're like at the beginning stages of the old system is getting sucked into this black hole, which I would describe as Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then as it starts getting blown out the other side, you're going to have interest rates that are going to be the first thing that start getting reassembled, and that is going to be the place to be as an investor, is in lending, um, and most likely peer to peer lending, which is, we could get into all the technical things around that, but it would be in lending. And then as those interest rates start to reprice all the equity, they're getting repriced in a dramatic way from where they are today at these 35x PE ratios. And they actually start to have to be priced in a way that provides a better price than the interest rates, whatever those yields would be. So if they're 10%, you're going to have PEs that are better than, that are priced lower than a 10, in order to start providing that risk premium that's associated with where equity should be. And then all of a sudden I start becoming the value investor that I want to be.
My head's spinning as you're saying this. There's like 5 things I wanted to tell you, but I only remember one. But one of them, like, there's so much you just said. So you're learning about value investing, and as you're learning about value investing, 2008, you have the crisis, 2009, and now you're learning all these principles, and you're saying like, this shit doesn't apply anymore, right? Like, it's running away. Valuations are going in a place it doesn't make any sense. Buffett's been wrong for 10 years plus, right? What was your origin story? When did you first learn about it, and when did you make that first purchase? And I'm guessing it was like, oh my God, there's finally a life raft, a savior to everything I learned was great, except I'm not Buffett, and it's not 1965, and I don't have a 6 PE ratio anymore. It's like 30. What happened?
We read a book by Tony Robbins called Money Master the Game. And in this book, he just went on and on and on about Ray Dalio. And I was like, my God, this
All
guy
weather,
is
right? Yeah.
just all weather, risk parity. And I didn't know anything about any of that. And I was reading the book from Tony Robbins, and he was talking about gold. And people, I mean, this podcast I'm assuming it's still published. It's probably out there. Um, I remember we were reviewing his book on the show. He talks about Ray Dalio recommending gold in your portfolio. And I was just like, all right, I've had it. Like,
What's going on here?
I know, like, Warren Buffett has told me that if you take all the gold and you put it in the infield of a baseball field and all this kind of stuff, like, he has all of his little talking points. And I was like, I'm just not buying it. This is nuts.
Yeah,
Like, if anything, go out and buy a TIPS, right? An inflation protected bond.
but that's the other thing. He had 55% allocation towards bonds when we're at 0% practically. It's like, well, what if they go up?
Levered
What if they go
bonds.
up? Yeah,
Lever
and he's not telling people if you're going to at least buy bonds, you got to buy tips, right? Like I thought that was a little irresponsible. I think we talked about that. I was like, I don't know why he's recently corrected that actually.
So I read this book and I'm saying, I'm sorry, but I've got to read more on this Ray Dalio guy because he's making such a big deal about him. And so it led me to actually finding the video that I think everybody knows about now, called How the Economic Machine Works. And at the time when I discovered this, it might have been like late 2014, maybe early 2015 that I watched this video for the first time. And after watching this 30-minute video, it was almost like this moment where everything you thought you knew about the economy was just kind of, I don't want to say it was flipped upside down, but it was almost like I was seeing in 2 dimensions and I started to be able to see in 3 dimensions for the first time.
Was it the rates? Because he everything's rates with him, right? Like, is that the eye opener for Dalio for you with Dalio?
The eye opener for me was just the long-term cycle.
Yes, yeah.
It was, I
The
wasn't
debt
even,
cycle and the rates and how everything is related to the risk-free rate.
I wasn't even aware of the long-term
Bro,
cycle.
it's like
All I knew is
Dalio
that
gave us the inside playbook. The problem is, by the time he gave it to us, and we found out like maybe a couple years after that, right? Maybe 2016, 17, I'm like, this playbook doesn't apply anymore, right? Like
yeah,
I mean, he's right about there's a crisis coming. He's wrong about the
yeah.
approach on how to protect against it, in my opinion. But
He provides the 4 talking points on like how it gets resolved. And then he talks about this beautiful deleveraging at the end, which everyone beats him up about, and I think for good reason. And then that's it. But that didn't, for me, it didn't invalidate all the other stuff in the video that I just intuitively was looking at and saying, that makes total sense. And that's scary as
Mhm.
hell because before watching this video, I was in the market during the 2008 crash. And, I watched my stocks that I owned go down in a, you know, dramatic way. It was just like this moment, like, my God, like, what the hell is this and what caused this? And ever since 2008, 2009, I was always under the opinion that nothing was fixed
Mhm.
fundamentally, but I didn't know what was broke.
Yeah.
I just knew that QE was them printing a bunch of money and buying the bond market. I knew that. And I was just like, this isn't solving nothing.
Mhm.
Like central banks have to let things
Yeah.
normalize if we actually want to live in a free and open market economy. And they weren't letting it happen. And so when I watched the Dalio video, I quickly was like, all right, well, now I realize why Tony Robbins is making a big deal about why this guy's so smart. So now let me read anything and everything I can get my hands on that this guy's ever written. And I came across a document on the Bridgewater website, which is not available anymore, but I would tell you basically his big debt crises book, his
Mhm.
three-part book is very similar to this document that I found on his site. It was a PDF that I was able to download. And I think it was a 200-page document that basically took, it was like 250-page document, went into detail on that video, that 30-minute video about how the economic machine works. And I mean, I read this thing. I went to Kinko's, had the thing bound, this PDF that I found, had it bound. I mean, I had the thing highlighted, tab. It's over there on my bookshelf right
That's
now.
awesome.
And I mean, this thing became to me like almost like a holy
Yeah, it's a
grail of
Bible.
books.
Yeah.
I have some books that I'll tell you like I wouldn't trade for anything. And like I know security analysis. Most people hate security analysis, but if I
I
pulled it
can
off the
agree.
shelf and brought it over, you'd see all my tabs, all my highlights from everything in it, right? And so I did that with this Dahlia book, and it really started to shape and really started to help me understand credit, and it helped me understand how these cycles are so driven by central bankers. And the whole Stan Druckenmiller talking about how I start with looking at the Fed and I go from there
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah, yeah.
kind of mentality of investing.
It seems like this was a secret to the retail market forever, right? Like, it feels like Dalio's
Yes.
exposed how the market works, but he didn't do it while he was
Yeah.
making his billions. He did it at the end of his career, right?
At the end of his
Yeah.
career.
Let's
Yeah.
not tell everybody so they know my
But
playbook, but he's giving out the playbook. The
yeah.
problem is the playbook's changed.
Yeah, and so I was looking at it and I was like, okay, so how in the world does this get solved? Dalio led me to a bunch of other books, like This Time is Different is an amazing book that goes through and profiles all these situations where currencies fail and like what kind of happens and like what causes it. And so I just really started to spend a lot of time studying those types of events and trying to understand how they could even potentially play out when when in today's situation everybody is doing it against each other. So if everybody is debasing in this competitive thing, like I kept telling myself, can this end? Because if everyone's doing it, like is there any net effect that actually materializes out of it? And I'll tell you, for a long time I wasn't fully convinced, and this is even after owning Bitcoin. I wasn't fully convinced that that could even happen, even knowing that Bitcoin could potentially provide that relief valve. I mean, early on in 2015, I didn't have all that much
Right.
conviction that,
You build that over time. Yeah. Yeah.
well, and it was just such a small market cap. And like, I mean, nobody was talking about any, like, you didn't even have SegWit at the time. So like the scaling of it to be able to take on that many payments and things, like it wasn't even close to that. This is all when like Mike Hearn was writing his articles and leaving the Bitcoin community and stuff like that. So all of those things led me to really kind of come to the conclusion that the fact that there's no peg, there's no fiscal responsibility, there's a growing appetite for neither party to care about fiscal responsibility, which is then driving the monetary policy response to debase the
Yeah.
currency. And since we're in a free floating fiat currency system where no country has a peg, that means every country is incentivized to financially engineer a situation where, because their currency is cheap, it will suck in currencies from other countries because the cost of goods and the cost of services are so cheap. So there's an incentive structure, when in engineering and when you study pressures and like Bernoulli's equation, when you create this low pressure, it has this vacuuming effect to suck other molecules towards that location. And so when I think about what currencies are doing is when those currencies are getting debased, it's like a low pressure that's then causing the molecules of other fiat currencies to flow towards it. And so all these central bankers have that incentive. If they don't respond in kind by debasing, like let's say you're the US and you debase your currency and you're pulling euros into your country, you're pulling yen, you're pulling all these other currencies into your domestic nation. What then has to happen for those other nation states is they then have to create that low pressure for them. So like Europe, once the euro's going up in value relative to the dollar, they have to respond in kind and say, "Oh, well, the euro's going up simply because the dollar is going down. Therefore, we have to do the same thing over here in Europe." And then they suck the dollars back over into Europe. So it's like this never ending do loop, fractal kind of thing that just progressively creates more and more fiat in this kind of exponential way. And it's this monster that's just like slowly devouring itself on a global scale. And I toyed with this question for years. And I was just like, how does this end?
Yeah.
How does this end? How can something step in and supply a relief valve to this insanity? How? And the only thing I have found that I think can actually supply it is Bitcoin. Now, some people listening to this might have a different opinion that something else could step in and provide it. But I think one of the key important points for me to say that is I think the only thing that can actually supply a relief valve to this is something that would be decentralized from sovereign nations from stopping it. Because if they can stop it, they will stop it because they have a very strong incentive to collectively not allow it to happen.
Couldn't they raise rates at a ridiculous price or rate rather, and just crash everything and create a Great Depression to reset things?
Yeah, but
They just won't do
the
that.
the problem with you'll never do that because politically, when you think of the incentive
Mhm.
structure, and this is something that I learned from Buffett and Munger that's just like so important, is like always look at the incentive
Mhm.
structure. Start there. And then because
What does Munger say? "Show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome," right?
I'll show you the actions. Yes. Because think about it, they're in the business of forecasting and making predictions based on probabilities of what they think that's going to happen. If you're in that kind of business, and when you understand incentives and you always start with what's the incentive, you get really you hone your ability to forecast so much better because then you can understand what action is most likely about to be supplied based on how somebody's incentives align. When you look at the incentive structure of the politicians, what is it that they actually care about? What are they incentivized by? They're incentivized by getting
Mhm.
reelected. They're incentivized by having that power. Now, are all of them like that? Of course
No,
not. Some are
but the
there for the right
majority.
reason, whatever, right? But if you're talking about a collective incentive structure, that's it. And so they don't have any type of incentive to not get reelected and to go along with policies that would supply such a thing. And more importantly, and I think this is another game theory incentive structure, is on a global level, let's say the United States does
Yeah.
that, but Europe doesn't.
Okay.
Okay. That is going to be not only devastating for the US to do that, it's just going to go somewhere else because that peg that is being used as universal money is not being enforced or provided to the overall economy collectively, and therefore the charade is going to continue if you get one person that's going to do it.
Let's rewind the tape. 2015, was that when you first purchased Bitcoin?
Bitcoin was being talked about. We were kind of aware of it. I really didn't understand all the nuances of it, but we were looking for topics to do on the show. And so where this new book came out, I think it very start of 2015, maybe even the end of 2014, called The Age of Cryptocurrency. I think it's Paul Vigna and maybe somebody else. There was another author. But anyway, so we read this book. We covered it on our show in 2015. And at the end of our recording, I said to Stig, I said, "Hey, so what are you going to do? Are you going to buy some Bitcoin?" He looked at me, he goes, "No." and and it was funny because I, for whatever reason, just saw it and saw it completely differently at that time than Stig.
Was that the aha moment, or you didn't have full conviction though? You said, right? You weren't fully convicted yet.
I didn't have a lot of conviction in how it would scale. That's where I thought it had issues. But where because of the amount of transactions that it could do, and attend, like no one's going to go and start using this, and they like the whole store value versus payment rail wasn't really even a talking point at that
Mhm.
point. And so whenever I was looking at it, I was looking at it as, hey, this could potentially answer this super hard question that I keep asking myself of how can this madness end? And I think that this could actually supply it in a really one-off kind of way. And if true, my opinion was the market cap was going to be and probably that of gold of $10 trillion at the time. And Bitcoin, I know my first one was like $220 is what I paid for my first one was $220. And I said, hey, if this is the market cap now, which I think, oh man, I don't remember what the market cap was back then, but I think it was under 10 billion. I just remember thinking, wow, this could go like not 10x, not 100x. Could be like 10,000 do like 100,000x or percent. I'm sorry, percent from where I'm at right now to where this could potentially go. So knew nothing about the like that the price would move in these 4-year increments.
Yeah, the
Like I was
halving.
aware of
Yeah,
the 4-year.
yeah.
I understood the halving. I understood that there was a 2-week difficulty adjustment. I didn't know how they were necessarily interrelated, or at least that's my opinion of how they operate back then. But I bought it and I was just like, I'm going to buy this and just hold it because if this would continue to mature, this could be just gangbusters of a trade. And the asymmetric piece to it for me was just really exciting.
Dollar wise, you didn't put a lot in at that time. You kind of built your position. Is that how you did it over time?
Yeah, and I would normally have said it, but when I was talking with Guy Swan, he purposely edited out the amount that I said, and it was like, "Preston, I saved
Yeah,
you."
yeah, 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 yeah. You don't have to say
So
the amount. Yeah,
yeah,
just but it was a smaller position and you
yeah,
built your position over time.
yes,
Okay.
yeah,
And today, we've talked about this. You're like all in, right?
yeah. This is
Other than like your
this is
house and your cars, like it's Bitcoin.
I think this is important for people to understand, especially as you're looking at sizing and percentages in your portfolio. So when people invest, a lot of the times what they're talking about is they're talking about like their savings, and they have a job that they're employed and that's their only other income
Sure.
source. And so by a person who talks about their percentage in that way is very different than a person who owns a
Yeah.
business that's kicking off free cash flows, and that business has a market cap, right? That is not denominated in Bitcoin, and versus the retained earnings of the business. So like a perfect example of what I'm kind of describing. So like Michael Saylor, like he took his entire retained earnings and put it into Bitcoin. But he also owns all like this. He doesn't own all of it, but he owns a massive equity stake of a business that kicks off $60 million a year, right? So is he in 100% Bitcoin? No, he's not.
Because he still has cash flow if he's wrong, I guess, so to speak.
That's
Right.
right. His Bitcoin could go to 0 tomorrow, and guess what? He's still kicking off $60 million a
Well,
year.
honestly, if he went to 0, he probably has a problem with all the debt because now he's gotten a little crazy.
Well
He's a drunken sailor.
so now let's pull the thread on
Yeah.
that. So his last
Mhm.
issuance was was
Billion.
0%
Mhm.
coupon that's convertible into
Yeah.
equity. So will he have less equity of his business?
It's
Yes, he will.
convertible, but let's be clear, it's convertible if he hits a strike price of like 1,400, I think. So if it falls, the Bitcoin, he ain't hitting that strike price because the stock is tied to it now. It's
Yeah,
pegged.
but you wouldn't have bondholders that would wanna exercise it, right? They wouldn't wanna exercise it into equity, so they would say, "Hey, we want our
Yeah,
fiat back."
liquidate your damn company, pay me back.
That's right. No, and that's a super fair point.
If he had not done that, I agree with you. He took the cash on the balance sheet, put it in there. Every year, he keep taking the cash that he produces, and he's going to put it in there on a quarterly basis. But if things go wrong
Yeah,
and he did not have any leverage on it, yeah, he could just start using the cash flow to operate the business again. He could have
that's
done
right.
that, but
Yeah,
now he's
that's
all
right.
in.
So for how much he's borrowed at this point, for only
That's
kicking
true.
off 60 million a year, yeah, he's probably too levered at this point. If this Bitcoin going to 0 on a
Yeah,
protocol that can basically update it. Yeah. But for a fun little argument to try to
exactly.
illustrate to people, like, what does 100% actually mean when you're talking about people that own equity that are kicking off numbers
That's right.
that are
So if you're retired or you've sold a company or you have a windfall of a lottery ticket or something, and you have this pile of cash here, but you have no cash flow, that they're totally different, right? If you have a job and you're
yeah,
making 100,000 a year or whatever you're making, and you take your savings and you put it all into Bitcoin, you still have your career and your job, right? You could
that's right.
recover.
So for me personally, I don't have
Yeah.
debt. I have, like, my company has no
Mhm.
debt. Would that be a concern for me? Not at all. I would tell you, if like Bitcoin just absolutely falls apart, it'd be very bad for me from a credibility standpoint with people in the investing space, and that's a huge risk that I feel I've taken
Mhm.
on. But at the same time, I would tell you my intentions for talking about it so much is more on finding a solution to what I think is a devastating problem for the world with respect to a a system that is dying, and I see it as a solution and a bright light that I'm trying to highlight to the world so that they can see that there's hope and that there's something out there that could actually resolve this and solve a lot of social issues, because I think all of this, when you get to a first principles level, solve so many of the social issues that we're seeing around the globe collectively. And so I find it to be a very exciting space to be talking about and participating in.
What if we're wrong? What if the worst case scenario were to come through and like, what's your hedge? How are you hedging? Are you hedging?
Well, and I think so this is a really important thing too, I think, for people to know. So do I have a massive, like, percentage wise position in Bitcoin? Yes. Do I think that's responsible for other people to do? Absolutely not. And more importantly, do I think it's responsible for other people to do who are not trying to hit a home run, but just try to take care of their family and protect their family so that they can retain whatever purchasing power and whatever net worth they currently have got? And what I would tell you, you need a
Yeah,
tiny
because of the
percent.
growth.
I would make the argument that you only need a 1% position today. And what's really interesting about this, as the price would go to, let's say the price of Bitcoin would go to $500,000, it would go 10x from here. I would then make the argument that a person needs to have a 10% position in Bitcoin at that
Yeah,
point.
because the growth is going to continue. It's like diminishing returns as a law of large numbers, so to speak. Yeah.
If you want to continue to protect
Mhm.
your buying power
Yeah.
and your net income, because as the
So
price
get in
goes
now and you can take
another
less risk essentially, right?
That's right. That's right. So if you would, and I know we sound like we're pumping it. I'm not pumping it. I'm doing it based on the numbers.
It's so small. Like 1% of someone's allocation. I mean, you'll make that up this year in your equities if you have equity positions. I mean, it's nothing. By far, you'll make it up. You'll 10x it. Yeah.
and based on historical performance, 1% was matching the performance of the S&P 500.
Unbelievable.
If you take 100% of your portfolio and invested it in the S&P 500 and kept it there for 4 years, and you took 1% of your portfolio and put it in Bitcoin, and the other 99% was in cash, your portfolio would have matched the performance. You would have got the same performance out of a 1% position in
Yeah.
Bitcoin as you would
And
have
that's because it's
100%
historically
in
growing over
S&P 500.
200% a year, right?
That's
Yeah.
right.
What do you think the performance will be over the next 10 years on a percentage CAGR basis? Compounded annual growth.
Higher than
You think
that.
it's going to accelerate? That's interesting.
Yeah. If it's truly a winner take
Yeah.
all scenario, and maybe there's some other type of protocol that handles decentralized applications. Can that happen? Sure. And I think a
You'll
lot of
see it
people
coming
like to
though,
say,
right? I mean, I'm not worried about a threat
well,
substitute. I feel like you'll see that.
so I'm an investor. I'm not one that like just goes out and willy-nilly throws money around. I'm looking at
Yep.
probabilities and I'm looking at things that I'm saying, I have a lot of confidence in how this thing operates for it to have longevity. And when I look at a lot of the other protocols, Ethereum
Mhm.
especially, I have concerns. Like I'll give you a perfect example. Binance came out with their smart contract protocol, and CZ was extremely smart in how he designed it, in that he allowed all the people who had done work on Ethereum, who had created decentralized applications on Ethereum, they had it in their code base, the code that they were using to do this. He allowed or he designed his Binance smart contract in order to allow the porting of that to come over without them having to change any of their initial inputs. So they can take all of the same inputs that they did on Ethereum, they can port it over to the Binance Smart Chain, and boom, he effectively just forked
Mhm.
Ethereum by doing that. But he lowered fees so that they don't have the fee issue. And he took like all the issues with Ethereum and basically forked it and made a better one. But what was so smart about what he did is he made them compatible for the people that were already over there on that chain so that they could just immediately port it over without there being any switching barriers, right? And so when I look at
Mhm.
that and I look at, well,
That's like a
I'm
pretty
going to get
quick.
crap for
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
this.
yeah. I was going to say with
I'm going to get
Bitcoin. Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to get crap for saying that I think both of them are centralized
Right, right.
relative to Bitcoin, like they're centralized
Mhm.
protocols. And I think that there's still risk for, I mean, you got Gary Gensler coming out and saying that he's going to start cracking down on things that he viewed as being security issuances and not the decentralized protocol creations. When I look at that versus Bitcoin, which I see as a very probabilistic outcome, I see just risk. And I say, you know what? There's just, for the amount of capture that could potentially be there, the probability of that being some other chain or whatever, or having an engineer, I have a lot of concerns with the engineering over at Ethereum. The haphazard, just kind of approach, like you don't have the Adam Backs of the world over there doing work on Ethereum. And so when I look at those kind of things, I'm saying that's a much lower probability of success. And so like why would I forego what I think is going to be a 200% annual return over here for something that might be a 250% return, but has a lot more competition space and has a lot more engineering potential failures. I don't think it's decentralized, which is what I think the entire movement is about, that can supply a global peg. It has no supply cap. Like there's these things that I'm just looking at and I'm just saying, I'm sorry, I'm just not interested in playing. But have fun working on it. As an engineer,
Sure.
like I'm looking at them like, guys, engineer away. And if you maybe you might create something or find something that then could be used in Bitcoin or any other protocol that maybe might materialize into the future that would be beneficial for whatever reason that you need to have it decentralized. I sure can't find another purpose other than money, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
Let's talk about corporate treasuries because that seems to be what's the buzz this year and maybe what's driving the price too. Do you believe that the price is driven by that, or is it just the halving?
I think it's a little bit of both, but if I was going to side on which one it is, I think it's the halving.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, this protocol is designed to systematically conduct itself in a way that creates time delayed supply
Mhm.
suffocation of the issuance to systematically drive the price up in what I would describe as these orbitals, almost like when you look at an atom and it has like an electron shell and the electrons can jump to outer shells. But what's fascinating, I think, with this is with when you're dealing with an atom, I think the electron gets a little bit less and less stable as it gets further and further out in its electron orbits. But with Bitcoin, I actually think it gets stronger and
So the more
stronger
dollars that go
the
in,
further.
it gets stronger.
That's right. So the further it jumps out into these orbits, the stronger and stronger it gets to until it completely separates and basically takes over and becomes global money.
The reason I bring up the public equities, I was talking to Mike Jones on my podcast, the previous podcast I did, and he was the founder
Mhm.
of Userplane, and he was former CEO at MySpace and stuff, and smart guy, right? And he has a blockchain fund or some sort, right? Crypto fund or something like that. And I asked him about the corporate treasury. I'm just reading my notes here. He said, he basically said that I said, "Do you think that like Apple and others are going to put this on the balance sheet?" And he said he didn't answer the question actually. He said, "Well, let me ask you this: Do they buy other volatile assets?" I don't know. He's like, "I really don't have an answer for that." He's like, "So if he's like, so if they're buying like equities as an example, I could see them maybe buying Bitcoin." He's like, I don't know why they would do that if they don't have a history of buying volatile assets in the past. And I thought that was an interesting thought experiment because I was like, yeah, that's interesting. Like, because they have to go to their board. And I mean, Michael Saylor, different ball game. He has control. I think he even said he's like moved people in and out of bought people out of the board and everything if they didn't buy in. So he's got full buy-in from his board and investment committee and himself. I don't think that's the case at Apple, right? It's more of a traditional business. When I had Scaramucci on the show, same thing. He first time he came on my show, he's like, "No, I don't think so because I think it's career risk." And then I had him come on again because the tape didn't work properly. And he's like, "I want to correct my answer on that." The last time, he's like, "I think they're eventually going to buy it. It's silly to say they'll never buy it." He's like, "When is the question?"
I definitely think that companies like Apple are going to buy it. When you talk about the volatility, and I would agree with the way that your friend phrased that, but yeah, they have marketable securities on their balance sheet. So they are buying stocks. That's when you look at Berkshire Hathaway and you
Oh,
look
for
at their
sure.
marketable securities, you can see all of the companies that they own. And that goes for most companies have a column on their balance sheet for marketable securities. And when you look at the volatility that's associated with them, they're obviously not the volatility
And it
of
takes a while
Bitcoin.
to buy it, right? I mean, American Hollow, right? So he's in the rooms with us a bunch on Clubhouse, and he's talked about this. And he's like, it takes like a year for them from the time they've made that decision. I think he gets that from Saylor. Saylor said in interviews too, to the time they can actually execute on it. It takes about a year, right?
Yeah, and it goes back to the composition of the voting rights of the board. So like Michael Saylor's a great example where he can expedite things because he has total control. When you get into a lot of these companies that have their voting rights that have been distributed to such a ridiculous level that it's leadership through consensus. And oftentimes it's leadership through consensus because of consensus where I don't want to ruffle the feathers of anybody around me. So think about these boards. For a lot of people on these boards, they find the position to be of a total metal as far as having that title in their credential. They also find the 250,000 to $500,000 payment to attend the four meetings and do a couple other things every year to be extremely advantageous and nice little supplement along with the title medal that they get. How much influence of shares are they actually having based on their own ownership of the company? Usually not a lot.
Yeah.
They're kind of like a person who's appointed by just random shareholders that have elected them by some little card that's been mailed out. When you look at their incentive structure is to sustain what they have and to not do anything that might jeopardize what they have. And so a lot of the times when decisions are being made strategically, the decisions are being made to not rock the boat, not do anything that could potentially have bad optics if it was a bold and bad decision later
Mhm.
on. And we're talking about something that requires bold, very bold
Right.
action that is a very contrarian position to have, that the dollar or whatever fiat currency you want to name is going to fail, and that this
It's a
random
pessimistic
magic
outlook.
internet
Yeah.
yeah, this magic internet money is going to be like the new form of settlement. And so when you look at all those kind of things and you look at the board structure and the incentive of the members, you quickly find out that it might take a while for some of the bigger companies, especially the ones that have a lot of decentralized voting rights with people that aren't founders that still hold a big chunk of the voting rights, like Michael. That's kind of the thing that's playing out for a lot of these boards.
And that's gonna take some time. So that it could take a year or so for us to see. I think I also saw that $100 million moving inflow into Bitcoin moves the price up by 1%. I just saw that recently. So
Hmm.
I think Ross Stevens was interviewing with Michael Saylor during that event a few weeks back, or about a month or so,
Yeah, yeah,
and he was saying that
yeah.
his order book is like 21 billion this year. That's just one company, one
Hmm.
asset manager.
When you look at a lot of the private equity space, I think you get into situations where there's a lot more control being held by fewer entities on boards. And so you're probably going to see much bolder moves. I suspect you're seeing much bolder moves into Bitcoin in the private space, and you have no idea what that looks like. I mean, I just look at my own company. It's a private company. I hold, a majority voting, and it's like I can go and do really bold things.
Yeah. And so you take the cash in your business and you're putting it on the balance sheet. You're buying a Bitcoin on the balance
Oh,
sheet, right?
I've been doing that
Convert it
since
like
2015.
instantly. Yeah,
Yeah, since 2015, I've been putting it on my balance sheet.
that's great. The Fed recently said, I don't know if you heard the comments, they view Bitcoin as digital gold to store value and not as a threat to the dollar. These are exact words, not a threat to the dollar. He said that Bitcoin is more of a replacement to gold than the dollar. Sounds pretty bullish to my ear. I think that was a mistake for him to say that. It's like, wait, where did he, what is going on here?
I forget the person that has this quote. It's out of Europe, but the quote is in politics. And I'm going to mess up this quote, but it's something like when they say that something isn't true, that's your basically your public omission that it is true. When they're specifically coming out and making a declaration that it's not a threat to the dollar, I think what they're actually screaming is that this is a threat to the dollar.
Interesting. So, what do you think they're going to do about it?
They're going to try a lot of things to bridge the transition. I don't know that a situation like this can come about in a smooth and orderly fashion. I'm very skeptical of that. And not because that's what I want to
Yeah.
happen. I obviously want the opposite to happen. I think the smoother and orderlier that this could be, the better. But I don't look at the world as how it should be, especially when it's not something I can control. I look at it how I think it'll be. You're going to get to a point where it's going to start ringing in people's ears. I'm missing something, and I'm missing something very, like in a very detrimental way if I don't act on this. At what point that occurs, I have no idea. But I think you're going to get there eventually. And I think people like to throw around timelines like a decade or 2 decades until something like that happens. I think they do that because, if I was going to tell you to guess the height of an elephant, like pick a height that you think an elephant would fit under. The smartest thing you could say would be like 1,000 feet because you're gonna be right.
Just go far
Or
out. Yeah.
or a million, yeah, 1,000,000 feet high, you're gonna be right. And so I think it's popular to throw around numbers like that, like
Sure.
2 decades,
Yeah.
right? But if I had to be realistic, I think this is coming in 5 years.
Wow. Sudden, yeah, gradually then suddenly, right?
Yeah, I think it's gonna play out in the coming 5 years.
10-year
And
yield.
and most of my
Yeah,
reason
good.
Yeah, most of my reason for saying that timeline, I think if it didn't happen on this cycle that we're currently in, which I think still has a lot more to run, I think it will happen by the next one, which puts us in that 5-year window. I think my reason for thinking that it's gonna happen within the next cycle for sure, well, not for sure, but I think that it could happen within the next cycle. I think that the bond market is such a sicker
That's what
puppy
I was
than
about to
people
get to.
realize. Yeah, I think it's so much sicker than what people realize that I think that that's what's driving the reasons why it's gonna become more obvious here in the coming
And so
years.
leading to that, let's get into the bonds, let's get into the 10-year and the Fed. Like when and how is the Fed going to implement yield curve? Like what do you think?
Yeah, I think in a way, they're already trying to prevent the yield from I mean, you can just look at what they're spending,
Yeah.
with their balance sheet, the Fed balance sheet, and you can see that they're already trying to, manage this a little bit. I think that they're gonna be really hesitant to come out and publicly proclaim, "We are now doing yield curve control." When they're doing that, it's gonna be because they need to try to calm the markets
Mhm.
down because it's gotten so out of
Yeah.
control.
So they're in there, they're buying. You're seeing it, right? They're buying up the 10-year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're not buying the 10-year, they're I think they're still doing most of it
Oh,
through the federal funds rate. That's what's gonna happen next is they're gonna have to step out into the,
longer
longer
duration.
duration.
Yeah.
So, like, when you look at the bond yield curve, the short duration stuff isn't moving at all. But I think the 2 year or the 5 year that you're actually starting to see the
Mhm.
separation where I mean, it's blowing out
Yeah.
in a dramatic way of people
Sell,
selling
sell,
the
sell.
socks off of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, the bond market's like
So
128 trillion and almost 20 trillion is negative interest rates. Isn't that money going to move into Bitcoin? Like, why are you buying a negative interest rate bond? This makes no sense.
guaranteed contract to lose money
Yeah, it doesn't make any
if you hold
sense.
it to maturity. If
Yeah,
you
yeah.
hold it to maturity. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
incredible. You'd only buy that if you think it's going to go even further negative. It just makes no sense, right?
Yeah. The greater fool theory of investing.
Mhm.
If in 30 years, 50 years, there were historians writing about this period of time. I remember as a kid reading about like the 1920s in like your history class and like the narrative that you were told in a very simple kind of way was they just kept borrowing more money and they just kept buying more stocks and then it just all fell apart.
Right.
And I remember as a kid just thinking, why were they so dumb? Like why were these people so dumb? I think that's how, in the future they're gonna look back at this time and there's gonna be narratives of like, yeah, there was people that were buying bonds that were negative, meaning they were guaranteed to lose money and there were human beings.
Why would you do
I
that?
think I think they were apes at the time.
Exactly.
They were the there were
Neanderthals.
Neanderthals 50 years
Yeah,
ago buying I mean, that's how stupid it is, but,
it's crazy.
until that reality distortion field is
Yeah.
lifted, people will continue to do that because they sit at a desk and they're being told, "Buy a tranche of $500 million worth of this 1% yielding bond that will
Well, the
mature," and
10-year, we've been talking about this for weeks, right? The 10-year rising this year has worried me, not
yeah,
just for like assets in general, but like Bitcoin too, all assets, including Bitcoin. And I
yeah,
think it's impacted it. And I brought this up to Scaramucci was on Clubhouse with us a couple weeks ago. He was in the Black Bitcoin Billionaire room. And I asked him
yeah.
about it. And he says, as long as the GDP is higher than the 10-year, we have nothing to worry about. We're fine. What do you think of that?
Yeah, Dalio talks about a very similar dynamic a lot of the times where he's comparing those 2 figures and he's saying, "Hey, as long as the one's above the
Mhm.
other, then you should be
And this
fine."
year we should be fine because we're coming out of the pandemic and we're having growth, he's saying. So don't be so focused on that.
Where maybe I would push back on Anthony's narrative is I think he's looking at it, and I don't mean this as a slight to Anthony because I like him a
Yeah.
lot. So Anthony, I think if he was the phrasing of the way he's saying that, I think he's right. when you're looking at it from a macro business standpoint, right? If you're talking about companies that have a market cap of 5 billion and more, like that's probably a valid statement. But as we've seen in very recent times, there are two different economies that we're looking at now. You've got Main Street, which makes up a majority of your businesses within the country, and then you have the large cap companies that are eating everything. And I think for those large cap companies, I'm with him. I think they will continue to outperform. I think they will continue to do well. But if the cost of materials and the cost of labor is going up, and we're seeing this, and that's why the bond market is selling off, is because everyone's seeing this and it's coming up in a dramatic way, keeps playing out, these smaller businesses all of a sudden are having issues sustaining their debt loads if they have to refinance, because maybe maybe their maturity is coming due and they need to refinance and they can only get a higher rate. That spells trouble. If they're selling their products and they were already struggling and now they've got a 10% higher price that they've got to pay, and their margins were only 10% in the first place, or way less, most likely way less. That spells trouble for the small business. Can they go out and just get loans and things like that? Well, without any government assistance, no. So I think where the disparity of what he's describing, which in any other type of scenario, I think is 100% valid what he's saying. I think now we're starting to getting into this interesting dynamic where the two economies, that might not be true, especially when you start accounting for higher interest rates and inflationary impacts for how these businesses will still remain profitable and in business.
It's interesting. The cost of capital, essentially, right, is going to go up, and it's gonna
That's right.
impact the economy overall. Yeah, it's interesting.
That's right.
I'm surprised he wasn't
And I
thinking of that.
mean,
Yeah.
well, and I don't even know that I'm right. Like I think, it's just my opinion on maybe a counterpoint to what he's
Yeah.
saying, and it might be dead wrong, Jay. I mean, we might go into the summer and you might watch things melt up like you just never seen.
Mhm.
And we've already seen this melt up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a parabolic equity price chart. It's crazy.
Goldman and Fidelity announced that they filed for their Bitcoin ETFs. And then Dalio says there's a good probability that Bitcoin gets outlawed. Come on, Dalio. Like, what's going on?
Well, I don't want to write him off
I
because I
know, but
have
I
so
don't
much
understand.
I don't
Come
want to write him
on.
off because
I
I have a
respect the
lot of
shit out of
respect
the
for
guy. I just don't know why
for how
he's
smart.
yeah, totally.
That's right. For how smart
Him
he
and
is.
Buffett, like
And
Buffett
so
calling it rat poison and never really kind of shifting away from that narrative. He doesn't keep saying that, but why don't they get it? What are they missing?
have you seen this article? Oh, what is the name of this article? I've shared it a million times and I can't even remember the name of it. It's this article that talks about why. Why do so many of these Wall Streeters, these MBA elites, and people in finance not get this?
Yeah.
Like, what is it what is causing this? And in the article, it talks about this fundamental thing, and it's trust in the
Mhm.
system that currently exists. So when you look at a person who's done well, they've worked on Wall Street, they don't want to think like that the system that they're operating in wasn't luck. Like they want to think like their hard work and everything that they did to get
They
to
don't
where
wanna
they're
think
at
that from
was
1981 to 2000, or not even, 2009, we went from
yeah,
20% to 0, and assets rose the opposite way. It's like, no matter what you
that's
did,
right.
you would have just done well in the market. Any idiot could have done it in hindsight. You had to have the fortitude and the discipline to hold it, but
If you're one of these people that A, will kind of fit this, and the name of the article is Why the Yuppie Elite Dismiss Bitcoin. I would strongly encourage people to read this article. It's a fantastic article. What he's saying is they are in this upper like part of society.
Mhm.
They're
Yeah.
wealthy. They want to believe that they got that based on merit. And for some of them, they probably did work very hard. and they have trust in the existing system that there's really nothing wrong with it, and that it's actually the reason all these issues are happening is because are selfish and bad people,
Mhm.
right? Like that's the narrative. So if you're one of these people, you're looking at Bitcoin and saying that price chart looks like tulips. All these people are going to lose everything. How can they possibly think that the government's not going to shut this down? I have faith in the government. Like, I have faith in the system that currently exists. It's fair. Like, what's unfair? Like, go out there and get a job, work harder. Maybe you'll achieve like I did. I think there's a lot of truth in the article.
So Dalio pushes, as you said, gold, right? This is the digital gold.
Mhm.
And if he's pushing
Yeah.
gold and this is the digital gold, and he's saying that this digital gold is going to get banned at some point, why would you push gold when they banned that in the past? How did that work out? It only went up in value, right? So I don't understand how he's not connecting those dots. It's confusing. But I hear your
It's
point about the article.
confusing.
Yeah, it's very confusing. It's disheartening because
Confusing.
they look up to these guys and they've taught me a lot about finance. That just reading all the articles and the books and stuff from Dalio and Buffett, and it's like it makes you question your conviction a little because you've learned so much from them.
It's just kind of crazy if I have a conversation with somebody who works on Wall Street. I almost immediately know they are not going to think that they are not going to believe in it at all, and they think that it's a joke and whatnot. And if I have a conversation with somebody who has nothing to do with finance and we start talking about it, they're just like, "Pfft, how can I buy some of this?" Right? Like, this just makes total sense to me. And I find that really kind of interesting that there is like this reality distortion field around Wall Street for them to like not be able to understand it for some reason. And hey, maybe Jay, maybe we're the crazy ones. I don't know,
I
but
know. Sometimes I think
um,
I am.
I yeah, I mean, I don't want to be the egotistical
Yeah.
person that's saying I'm right and you're wrong.
Let's talk about risk for a second, right? So, what is the biggest risk for Bitcoin to your mind?
For me, it's two big risks. The first, I would have told you the legal part of it, but I think we're way
Mhm.
beyond that. I don't necessarily see that as
Sure.
too big of a risk right now. The first one is just the SHA-256
Mhm.
encryption. If this is a one-way function that produces a hash, and that's your private key. Like, you produce a private key through a one-way function. If for whatever reason there's like a multiple, like there's one input that can produce two of the same or I'm sorry, two inputs that provide the same output, that would be a problem. Or if there was some way to mathematically solve what the pairs would be for two inputs that would produce, like, all of those things there's no way to prove that that's not possible.
So, encryption is a risk, right?
So encryption's a risk of just the hash, the function that's being used, and also not just on the SHA-256 of Bitcoin itself, but also on the elliptical curve for the key generation. So, like, there could be risk there that just no one can you can't prove that there isn't a
Mhm.
problem.
Until there is.
Um, so that's one. And the second one would be for me, if the hashing really started to demonstrate that it wasn't a profitable venture for miners to continue to secure the blockchain for whatever reason. And so when I'm looking at the health of Bitcoin, I'm saying that's probably one of my most important factors, even more important than more people signing up and opening more wallets. Like, I think a lot of people like to see the wallet growth, like how many
Yeah,
more
I've heard you
public
say this. You
addresses are
watch the
being
hash rate
opened.
all the time, right? You're
I like to watch the hash rate. I mean, it's really obvious that it just keeps going up. So it's not like there's any type of concern. But if there would be some narratives out there like Bitcoin's dead and here's all the reasons why, and then I would look at the hash rate and I would see that it's gone down for the past few months, and there was a narrative of why, that would be concerning to me, especially if that trend would persist and for whatever reason, because at the end of it, I'm of the opinion that the miners are setting the floor in the price action. And as that stock to flow gets scarcer, that they set a floor that's higher, and then the next 4 years it's higher. And so if I see them disappearing, if that theory or that idea is valid that they're setting that floor, if they're disappearing and they're not making a profit by securing this and providing that activity of security to the network, that tells me the labor theory of value that I'm applying to this, which I think is valid because you're dealing with a fiercely competitive commodity, and some other factors of why I think that that theory actually is valid here. Most people laugh at that theory, but I think in this particular situation, it's actually valid. I would have cause for concern as to the viability of Bitcoin moving forward if something like that happened.
Talk to me about Plan B stock to flow for the audience. Explain this to the audience, and he's been like on point, man. It's really impressive.
It's insane how accurate this
Yeah,
has been.
it really is.
It's
Is it just like a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point, or what?
well, and you hear that angle of like, hey, is it the model that's producing these results, or is it because there's the math is producing these results? And like most things, it's probably a little bit of both. When I think of the math and I think of what the math is actually showing, what I think the math is actually showing you is that production cost. And I think it's showing you based on the flow that's being dropped into the market. It's demonstrating to you the homeostasis that's occurring naturally in the market. So when you talk about gold and you talk about how the price of gold is being achieved, let's say the price on gold just shot up because of some macro narrative and it shot up a lot. Every gold miner in the world is now trying to ramp up production in order to capture this massive margin that they've got. Well, the act of them reacting to the price in that manner allows them to pull production and pull the gold that they're pulling out of the crust of the earth
Yeah.
faster to the left than what it would have normally come out, which is then dropping more supply into the market, which then drives the price back down. So what you get is this homeostasis, like porpoising in the price action that occurs based on this these variables: the cost to hire people to do it, the amount of supply that you can actually pull forward to the left, the amount of fear that was induced by whatever macro event would have spiked the price, and how much fiat currency is in the system. Like all these variables are all at play that are driving a homeostasis in the price. Where Bitcoin is different, and where Bitcoin is trying to find a new homeostasis level every 4 years, that's a little bit different than gold, is you can't pull the production to the left. You can't speed it up. If you try to bring a million more workers to the mine
It
tomorrow,
doesn't matter.
God God swoops in and says, "All right, you're going to find 1 millionth of the gold that you found in the crust than you did yesterday." That's the difficulty
Yeah.
adjustment, right?
Yep. There's nothing you can
and
do. It's
and
unchangeable.
so
It is what it is.
and it would be like God coming from above and saying, "It's been 4 years according to my clock, and now you're going to find half as much gold as you did
Yeah.
yesterday." That's what
And then you
Bitcoin
run
is.
out in 120 years.
And so what Bitcoin's doing, and I think what Plan B's model is demonstrating, and he's not doing it through all these variables. He's doing it through just a simple modeling of what the world has used for a long time in order to model commodity prices, which is stock to flow. But I think because you're dealing with it now in a digital form,
It's predictable.
which you've never been able to do before, it's way more predictable and way more. Your ability to see it on a graph becomes way more accurate because you're there's no way to kind of you're removing some of the variables that would naturally happen in the commodities market, and you're removing those in the Bitcoin space, and maybe that's why we're able to see it so clearly
And
in
you
in
and
a
we obviously
chart.
keep having an increase in demand. And to your point, it's a scheduled
Yeah,
decrease in supply. But more importantly, the demand that's coming in is going cold storage. You're taking supply off the market.
I think they have a hard time buying the stock to flow
Mhm.
model because of this particular piece. They're saying if this was true, you would have seen the price would have been front run. before the May 11th, right? They were like, okay, if this is true, then why aren't people front running it? Well, what you have happening is the homeostasis price based on the flow that's getting dropped into the market. Well, at the end of that 4-year period that preceded the one we're in right now, you were at peak competition amongst miners for that stock to flow rate. Okay. So as that new stock to flow rate enters the next 4-year cycle, okay, the as you look at the amount of hashing power that comes on from the start of that cycle to the end of that cycle, the hashing rate is exponentially higher at the very like the day before the halving happens, right?
Mhm.
You have so much hashing that's online at that point that is competing for that same flow that's been dropping into the market for the last 4 years. And so I would think of it like this, almost like a choke collar when you're walking your dog, how the choke collar gets tighter and tighter as they pull
Mhm.
further and further. When you're at the end of that 4-year cycle, that choke collar is like really, really tight on that dog. And the dog isn't able to stray very far from the production cost because anybody and everybody is online trying to mine and they know
Yeah.
what that price target is. After the halving happens, the price that it was previously in continues to persist for a few months, about a
And that's
quarter
the part that's confusing to a
afterwards.
lot of people too, with this part right here.
So
Yeah.
this is also confusing to a lot of people. But what you have to remember is the miners that were profitable, they were paid in Bitcoin
Mhm.
and had their balance sheet stacked at a reward rate that they were comfortable managing and understanding. And so they have a treasury of Bitcoin that are sitting there on their balance sheet. And all of a sudden, all they know is they're collecting half as much of the reward as what they were getting before the day before. And they're saying, so like think of it like if you were a gold miner, like, and all of a sudden, like literally at the snap of a finger, like Thanos came down and snapped his
Cut the
finger, and
production down.
and now
Right.
you're getting half as much gold. And that was a total nerd comment, but um but you snap your finger and you're getting half as much. Those gold miners, they're like, oh, whoa,
Cut back.
we got to pull some production back offline. We've got to really kind of get in a conservative mode here. We're going to attrit this treasury of gold that sits on our balance sheet, which is our profits right now, that we got to continue to like harvest until we start getting more profitable again. They're doing these activities that they're preserving the amount of selling because they're trying to survive
Mhm.
because they're getting half as much of a reward. And what that ends up doing is it's providing this supply suffocation, and it's slowly making the price run. And then you start getting all the speculators that come in, and then they start bidding the
And then
price.
they
And then
increase.
all of a
Yeah.
sudden they start getting back in the money again, and they're bringing on the rigs that they used to, because one of their first activities, these miners after that event, is turn off all the expensive
Yep.
rigs, the old ones, the ones that have the like a processing speed
I
of a
mean,
snail,
Jason
right?
Williams, right? He runs a mining company. I think that he's mentioned this to me. Like when this happens, they just cut
Yeah,
back, right? They just yeah.
yeah. And this is why they get
And
it.
there's and
Like,
there's and the miners that they have, the physical machines, the difficulty as it increases, they're not as efficient. So then they just dump the old equipment for the new happening, as it keeps moving forward, and they buy new equipment. So there's like a turnover as and
that's
need
right.
faster
There's a
processing and
huge
yeah.
when is there a reward for the new entrant? So when you think about mining, if you wanted to become a miner today and you go out and buy the latest and greatest rig, right? You have now the fastest that you are running 4 times faster
Mhm.
than somebody who did it for 4 years. Right? Like, when is that the case?
Yeah.
And so you step into the market and you're just like, oh, well, I can do half as much of the issuance rate right now with this new rig I just purchased. And so you can carry the security of the network as it transitions through this finger snap moment where half the reward is now being dropped. And so Moore's law, and I think so many people miss this. Moore's law is also built into this incentive structure and the game theory that keeps Bitcoin's price being driven to higher levels, because new miners stepping in can easily compete way better than people that have been in the game for a while that are running these old rigs.
Let's talk about the Bitcoin lending, right? So Jason is an investor in a few of these companies, I think BlockFi most notably. First of all, can you just explain to the audience what is Bitcoin lending? We kind of touched on this earlier, and I know in general, anybody who's a Bitcoiner is like, I'm never selling my keys, my coins rather, never selling them. At some point, I'll borrow against them, but I don't really like where we're at today. Can you just maybe discuss maybe like BlockFi and Unchained Capital and a few of these other companies? Explain that in a very simple way.
Companies aside, what's interesting is you now have a demand for people to borrow these digital tokens, whether it's a digital dollar or fiat. And the only reason that you have like a demand for those is because they immediately clear. Okay. When you're dealing in this new economy that's being constructed right next to the old one, the name of the game is a reduction of risk through immediate clearance and a trustless like exchange between two parties that do not have to know each other. And so that's why you see USDC, or the unpopular one is Tether,
Mm.
and you see these stable coins that are being stood up is because the traditional legacy dollars that clear in 3 days or whatever the ridiculous clearing time is a massive risk when talking about borrowing and lending in a new economy that does not believe in fractional reserve anything. Everything in the Bitcoin economy is equity based, and I love it. And going back to like how I was raised, right? I was raised that you work first and then you spend second. And so for me, I love this new economy because it is an economy that if you want to go out and buy a house, well, then maybe your parents should help you out, or somebody else should help you establish some type of it's a total shift in mindset. Everyone's been in, and I don't blame our society. Our society has been incentivized, going back to incentive structures, has been incentivized to spend the money as fast as possible and to use leverage because when the money's getting debased, you are incentivized to lever up. But that's all transitioning into this new system that is the exact opposite of all those things. So when we talk about lending, it's over collateralized. So if you want to go borrow $100, you need to put up $150 worth of value. And I'm using dollars. It could be
Right.
Bitcoin. It could be whatever. You need to put up more than that to borrow that. So the loan to value ratio is what you're talking about here. So like a 50% loan to value is the same as putting up twice as much as what you're borrowing.
And what are they doing? So like, let's make it simple. So if I'm lending my coins to somebody, they're shorting it. Is that what they're doing? They're just shorting it. Like, what are they doing with your coins?
What they're doing with the coins, from my understanding, is they're going out. I mean, you could be doing all sorts of things. I would
Sure.
tell you the simplest thing to understand is if you just need working capital and you don't want to go through the process of all the rigmarole. I'll give you a perfect example. So, like, if I want to go get a loan with my bank for working capital, it's going to probably take me 15 to 30
That's a good
days
point.
to pull that
Mhm.
off. Okay. Or I could go on to one of these lending platforms, and let's say I needed to borrow $50,000, I could just deposit 2 Bitcoin. They'd give me the $50,000. I'd go out, do whatever I had to do, and if I get my $50,000 back that I need to repay, call it 2 weeks later, I can I can take that $50,000, pay back my loan, and get my 2 Bitcoin back. And I could literally take out that loan probably within 5 minutes
Yeah.
of right now.
Yeah. And they're paying like real interest rates. Like you're not seeing this anywhere else.
That's right. I could go borrow $1 million right now
Yep.
within 5
Yeah.
minutes with no paperwork at all.
Mhm.
And all I got to do is just deposit the collateral in escrow and take it out, and boom, it's done. So the ease of getting access to it, especially if you know you're going to be able to pay it back quickly, and you're not too concerned about the measly interest for such a short duration of holding, to have the ease of capital, well, then there you go. So now when you look at how are other people using it in a trading kind of
Right.
way, so there's a contango in the market right now. So let's say I wanted to go do that contango trade where I go into the market and I have the underlying and I want to write a futures contract that is being purchased for more than the spot. Okay. I could take the Bitcoin that I have, I go, I make my deposit, I borrow, right? I go out there, I secure the spot, I go ahead and I write the contract for, at a premium, and I come back and I pay back my loan of what I borrowed, and I have my the little bit extra that I made on that trade, on that quote unquote risk free trade, and boom, I'm done, right? I did it. Hopefully, if you're doing this right, you're doing this like in a day,
Mhm.
and your interest that you're paying on that is minuscule to what you're capturing by writing those contracts. So, and you're doing this in futures, you're doing this in any type of derivative that has these features of a spread. So that's where the demand is coming
Yeah.
for these markets, and why the interest rates are so high is because the going rates of some of these spreads. In my opinion, why you're finding the rates that you're finding is because the spreads in these markets are 20% on an annualized basis. So if I can go do this trade and make 20%, well, my lending rate, if like I know BlockFi, I think they're lending
6.
or
Yeah.
they're on their deposits like 6% or
Mhm.
something like that. That's how they're offering those rates.
Wow. Unchained Capital, I saw a tweet between you and Unchained Capital,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you can hold custody of your keys, but they'll still pay you interest. And on Twitter, you questioned, "Is this possible?" And they said, "Yes, it is." They wrote you back. And then you said that you would
Well,
possibly be a customer if that's the case. So how are they doing that? Because I'm sure you've dug into this right after the tweet. How are they doing this if you're not like actually lending out the keys? You're like you're holding. How are they doing this? Is it multi-sig? Like what's going on here?
I don't know, and B, I don't think they want you to know. At least not today, because I think for them it's a very competitive thing for
Proprietary.
them
Yeah.
to to know how to do from a technical standpoint. Do I think
Is
that
it
they do know how to?
derivatives?
Hell yeah.
Is some kind of some kind of a
Oh,
derivative?
no, no, no. Like this is all this is what's so exciting
Yeah.
about this news that you're talking about here. So when you look at what BlockFi is doing,
Mhm.
you are putting your money into a black
Yeah, you're
box.
just literally giving it to 'em.
And this is for any of these lending platforms that are not peer to
Mhm.
peer. If you go peer to peer, like Hodl Hodl is peer to
Yeah,
peer, I can see the public address where my escrow is sitting. So I know what my escrow is. If it's Bitcoin that's in escrow, I know it's Bitcoin. If it's USDC that's in escrow, I know it's USDC. And so I would tell you from just like your risk there is a technical risk, because if the price, which is functioning in a 24/7 market, if the loan to value starts to come to parity with each other, it just gets liquidated. You get your money back, and like your deposit is not at
yeah,
risk. If you lose your key and the other person loses their key, then your deposit probably is at
right.
risk. I find that to be way lower risk than dealing with a platform. And this is obviously my personal
Sure, yeah,
opinion. Other people would probably argue the opposite. I don't know. When you're talking about a platform, you're making a deposit, and maybe you're making a deposit in Bitcoin, and then it's going into a black box that's then being managed by that
yeah,
platform, almost just like what you would see in traditional finance. And you hope that they are leaving the counterparty in a collateralized way, over collateralized way, and not cutting corners so that they can make more money for their platform, right? Which is, you have no way of auditing that. Now, where Unchained Capital is doing this differently, and this is important. So up until now, and up until that exchange that you saw between me and
yeah,
Unchained Capital, my opinion was the only way you can actually lend Bitcoin and get Bitcoin interest is by trusting a platform owner with a black box. You can't do that in peer-to-peer lending right now. Like if you go to HODL HODL, you are only lending out USDC. You're not lending out
Right.
Bitcoin and collecting interest on it. Okay. That's important. What Unchained Capital is suggesting in that message is that now through encryption and through some type of engineering feat that they've accomplished,
Would love to know what that is.
they I would love to know what it is too. And I don't suspect they're going to tell you until it's launched.
Yeah.
Now with their technology, you're going to be able to make a deposit. You're going to be able to hold the key to that deposit.
How is that
That
possible?
deposit,
Yeah.
that deposit can be Bitcoin. That deposit can be Bitcoin. It's going to go out. You're going to be able to see the escrow, okay, in a public address, and you're going to be able to collect your interest. Now, I don't know if
I mean,
the
like,
interest is going to be
traditionally
paid.
speaking, this I don't understand, Preston. Traditionally speaking, if you're not lending it out, right? Like you're holding onto your keys, right? If you have full custody of your keys, what's the risk? I feel like there's no risk. And that's why you probably said, then I would be a
The
customer, right?
That's right. That's why I responded the way I was. And I was
If that's the
and
case, if it's literally what you're saying, you're gonna have a lot of customers.
I was a little, if you read the whole thread, I was a little snarky at first because I was asking them the question, be like, "Oh, so you allow Bitcoin deposits and interest, right?" I knew the answer was no, right? But they kind of provided an awkward, weird kind of response, and then I pushed a little bit more, and I said, "Hold on a second, you're beating up these other platforms, but they don't allow Bitcoin deposits. So how else is a customer to do so, right?" And then they dropped the bomb of like, uh, ooh, we cracked that nut. and it was and so then my response is, I'll be a customer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I truly mean that. And I'm really excited because I have a lot of faith in credibility. I place a lot of credibility in Parker over there. I'm really excited that these guys are going to do this. In fact, I have them coming on the show. We're going to have a discussion about this
Can't wait to see
particular
that.
topic.
Yeah.
It's going to be really exciting for me to learn more.
Like what's what I can't wait to go and talk to them because I want you to ask them without multi-sig or without retaining. If you have full custody, what is the recourse? Like, is it a judicial system?
Dude, I'm
Like
gonna
sue people? Like, I don't understand. Like, what?
I'm telling you, no, I think this is definitely technical.
Yeah.
And I definitely don't think they're going to get into the details of it. And I don't blame
Sure,
them. You know,
sure,
I
sure.
think that they're going to be first in the market to really kind of do this in a peer-to-peer kind of
Mhm.
way. And I think it's extremely exciting for them. More importantly, it's extremely exciting for the entire global economy
Mm.
that such a thing is going to be possible because now you're going to find out what the real risk-free rate is for for the cost of capital.
Yeah.
And boy, oh boy, is it going to have some major ramifications for everything finance on the entire planet.
Final question. What is your 10-year price prediction for Bitcoin?
The elephant is under 1,000,000
That's
feet.
right.
Um, well, I think when you get into this, I think when you go out 10 years, you're not even measuring it in dollars anymore.
Mhm.
I think what you're doing is
Hyper
this is a fun little
This is hyper Bitcoinization.
yeah, this is hyper Bitcoinization, and you're just really kind of measuring everything in Satoshis at this point. What I would challenge people to do is if you were going to try to understand what the value of Apple is in Bitcoin, how would you figure that out? And so for me, how I think about that is what is the value of every single thing on the planet? What would that number be today in fiat terms? And then you write that down and then you divide by 21 million.
Which comes to 19 million
And
Bitcoin, right?
well, it depends on a lot of your assumptions on what that total
Yeah, I
number
think it's
is,
400,
right?
but yeah, yeah. So just going off of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you gotta, yeah. So
Sorry, 400 trillion
the,
for
the number,
those that aren't in the Bitcoin communities, right? So that have heard this before. Yeah.
and there's a lot of debate on whether derivatives should be included or
Right.
exclusive or kind
Then
of
it's much
included.
bigger. Right.
Yeah, and I don't know what that would be, but if I was going to conservatively throw out a number that makes sense in today's terms, you're like at I think 5 to 10 million
Wow.
per Bitcoin is like the
Get your Bitcoin,
value
people.
of buying power
Just get one.
of what one Bitcoin could buy you in
Yeah.
this new world. And
And that's
so
in today's USD, right? That you're talking in dollars today,
today's US
not inflation
dollars,
as we move forward, right? We're saying
yeah,
all because there's going to be inflation towards hyper Bitcoinization, right? There's going to be a lot of inflation on the way there.
yeah.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be using the word when. I should say if we say this happens, like it's not like Bitcoin's going to go to 10 million and stop per coin. It would once it would get to 10 million, then it would just keep going.
Well, yeah, because at that
And
point it sucks everything in, and there's like this inflation, and it just gets out of
that's
control. Yeah.
right. And then it's just like the same way people look if I told you, "Hey, I'm gonna give you 50,000
Mhm.
sats." Like in your head, you're just like, "Okay, well, I need a calculator to figure out what the value of that is." The same thing will happen with fiat, in my
The
opinion,
opposite. Yeah.
once you start getting so far beyond, a couple million, people are then gonna be denominating everything in sats,
Wow.
and they're gonna have to do
That
like a
house is
conversion of like, well,
500,000 sats, or
like
it's like,
like how many dollars is it this minute?
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
because in an hour it's going to be another million more than that.
Wow. How does the government maintain its operational cost if we go to hyper Bitcoinization?
First and foremost, I think what's going to be beneficial is that every government in the world is going to be in the same situation with that question, which is going to assist in it not being as controversial of how the response should be handled. And I think people are going to figure this out really fast, and they're going to figure out real fast that they can't manipulate the baseline of this.
Mhm.
And then the immediate conclusion is going to be quickly, oh my God, if we're not responsible, we are going to fall behind way faster than countries that are quickly adapting and becoming responsible. I think it's going to be obvious to policymakers, and I think it's going to be obvious to most citizens of the world that if they don't actually start to become overly responsible as an initial reaction, that there could be dire consequences to such actions. Now, this is going to be very bad for government employees. This is going to be very bad for especially governments that have had the luxury of uh, of being able to control the printing press.
US.
And if they don't, if they don't respond to that quickly and try to get it under control, it could have some dire consequences in I don't want to say short order, but fairly quickly. I'm more concerned. Well, I'm not more concerned, but I think a big consideration in a lot of that is just infrastructure in general. When you've had the luxury of the printing press at your hand, I think from an infrastructure standpoint, you might not realize what luxury you had until it's taken away as far as the sustainment of a lot of that stuff that just keeps getting budgeted into as just a cost of doing business, and it's going to become a really real expense. And you're going to find voting citizens that are now getting paid in this, and you're going to find that all of a sudden their incentive structure immediately changes to I want to save this and I don't want to pay higher taxes and I don't want to um, have that ball stadium that they wanted before because it was all made up money and it didn't necessarily feel like their taxes went up because they could just like all of a sudden the lens of participants inside the economy drastically shifts to wanting to be much more responsible just because of the change in the incentive structure naturally solves itself.
I have a final question for you. Something I wanted to ask you earlier. We've talked about this in the previous attempt at the podcast. We had some issues. uh,
My fault.
yeah, yeah. Your switch wasn't working or whatever. So groupthink. How do you protect against groupthink? You've had some thoughts about this. I wanted to hear your opinion on that.
So groupthink is vital to a person's success. And I'll tell you, Jay, I think I've probably done a bad job with respect to how I handle a lot of various people, maybe on Twitter, as far as blocking too quickly instead of just letting people say their piece.
You mean like Jason trolling me the other day? And on a meme about big clout. You came to my
I didn't
defense.
even see that.
No, you came to
I
my
did.
defense. Remember? You
Oh,
put
yeah,
it
yeah,
goes
yeah, yeah, yeah,
no
yeah.
clout because
Jason,
I
yeah,
just
yeah.
created the account and it said like 0. I didn't block
No,
him.
this is how I think
Yeah, yeah.
about it. And I'm not saying I'm a saint in this area either. But when a person steps into an argument or is trying to have a counter opinion of somebody on Twitter specifically, there's two ways you can approach it. You can approach it in a way where you're both trying to discover the truth,
Mhm.
or you can approach it in a manner where you're trying to protect your ego. And the one is self-serving and the other one is mutually beneficial for both parties and anybody else who views it. And I guess for me, anytime I've seen somebody that maybe leads off with the approach of it's for their ego, my inclination is I just want to block them so that I don't ever have to deal with them because I see it as gaps in their personality. I see it as blemishes and things that could potentially warp how I get cognitively
Mhm.
programmed through my interactions of other people and influenced. And so I see it as kind of a threat to that. And I don't want the other blemishes in a person who acts in that manner to start becoming a part of my own. And like I said before, there's no way that I've had interactions on Twitter where my ego did not become a part of some of the conversation. So I'm as guilty as the next
Yeah, yeah.
person. By blocking people, especially over something that maybe only happened one time, and then the other 99 times they're saying really great things or things that are valuable that you miss out
Sure.
on, the groupthink thing is becomes very real and it becomes something that could totally destroy you in the long run because you've just totally isolated yourself out there.
Mm.
At the end of the day, I don't know that I've done the best job at it. It's something I think about. It's something I really want to guard against. I also think that I'm getting pretty frustrated with everything that's happening in the world. I see Bitcoin as a thing that could offer a solution to the insanity and the chaos, and the more of the same mindset that's only doubling down and making it worse. And so when I see individuals kind of promoting the old system and suggesting like that Bitcoin is the cancer,
Mm.
I just want to like get them out of my face, right? And I don't want to see them again, and that can be detrimental. And I think not only myself but many other people need to guard against that initial knee jerk
Yeah.
reaction to act in that manner. And I really appreciate the question because I think it's something that I can do way better, and I think everybody else can too. So
Cool.
yeah, it's important. It's super important.
Dude, we got it done.
We got it
We got
done.
it done.
It was fun.
It was 2.5 hours. That means it was good. I mean, I wouldn't have kept going if it wasn't a good conversation. So I really appreciate all the time, the effort. You just got over your COVID, vaccine, and
My COVID shot. Yeah.
your mixer's working now.
There's a lot of issues.
It was like 3 attempts, I think, right?
No, I think we had more than that, Jay. But we got here.
No, it's cool. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Yeah. Yeah. My pleasure.